G'day, May 40 here. So things may look bleak right now, but just remember, in the winter, far beneath the bitter snows lies the seed that with the sun's love in the spring becomes the rose. So most dissident right streamers, alt-right streamers anyway, they just hate America, right? They just got a palpable hatred of America, and they believe that America is collapsing. Well, guess what? America is not collapsing. America is getting stronger, and America will dominate the 21st century, according to the information we have. Even more than America dominated the 20th century. It will outstrip its rivals increasingly in the years ahead. And I think I probably disagree now with John Mearsheimer. I don't believe we're living in a multipolar moment. I believe we're still living in the unipolar moment. There's only one superpower in the world right now. That is the United States of America. America is essentially unrivaled. And the book to read about this is by Michael Beckley, Unrivaled: Why America Will Remain the World's Sole Superpower. So it's interesting, the loathing on the part of the alt-right for America, and the confidence by most dissident right streamers that America is just going to fall apart, collapse, that it will break apart. Average Chinese worker is half as productive as the average Turkish worker. All right. Like Chinese workers aren't as productive as Mexican workers. And yet, throughout the dissident right sphere, people are just so cocksure that 21st century is going to be the Chinese century. Even though the average Chinese worker has half as much education as the average American worker. What Chinese consumer product do you most associate with quality? Can't think of any. All right. So why do so many dissidents so confident that China will dominate and that America will fall apart? Well, because we don't see the world as we are. We don't see the world as it is. We tend to see the world as we are. And most dissident right streamers, their lives are falling apart, and so they just project that onto America. So their lives are just constant humiliation and failure. And so they then project that onto America. But that's not the score, right? That's not the real score. That's not what's going on in the world. So there's a terrific essay in Foreign Affairs by Michael Beckley, who wrote the book Unrivaled: Why America Will Remain the World's Sole Superpower. It's in the November-December issue of Foreign Affairs. Rogue Superpower: Why This Could Be an Illiberal American Century. So we've got a Biden administration in power now, and they will use different rhetoric from the Trump administration. But the rhetoric people use doesn't always accord with how they behave, right? The Biden administration is going to continue in foreign policy an America first foreign policy, just as there wasn't a significant difference in American foreign policy of incentives. And the incentives are that America is going to dominate, and it has less and less incentive to make alliances with other democracies around the world. America will be increasingly self-sufficient. It's already energy self-sufficient. Demographics are going in a positive direction as far as age, as far as workforce in America compared to its main rivals. So the faces may be different and the rhetoric may be different, but you can't govern yourself just by rhetoric. You have to deal with reality. So I'll give you an example. We've got the Super Bowl coming up, right? So we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers led by Tom Brady going up against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. And the Chiefs are on an absolute tear. They've only lost one real game in, about 20 contests. So Kansas City looks like a solid favorite. But one of the key tactics for the Tampa Bay defenders against the lightning fast Kansas City Chiefs, their receiver Tyreek Hill, is that they're going to have to clutch and grab quite a bit. Now, clutching and grabbing receivers is against the rules of the National Football League. That's called holding. But if they don't call it, is it still holding? All right. You're still doing the same clutching and the same grabbing that in a previous year would be flagged for pass interference, holding. And this year, referees are just not calling these penalties as much. They're not calling holding as much on offensive linemen, and particularly in the playoffs. Remember, the incentives that referees face is that if they don't throw a flag, they're much less likely to get into trouble than if they throw an ill-judged flag. So it may make you squeamish to suggest that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers need to cheat to win a big game. But what is cheating and not cheating isn't just a matter of the rules on the books. It's a matter of the rules as they are enforced. There's all the difference in the world between laws on the books and then laws as they are enforced. And in the 2020 season, there's been a dramatic reduction in holding penalties, pass interference penalties, penalties overall. Right? So we've had an explosion in offense. We've had a massive reduction in sacks. We've had quarterbacks with much more time in the pocket because their offensive line feels much more free to hold the defensive line pass rushers. And that's the new reality. All right. So you can't just go by the rules on the books. All right. So if you watch the NFC Championship game, you saw virtually no penalties called. I mean, the crew was just not willing to call defensive holding, illegal contact, pass interference. And so the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were particularly aggressive with their pass coverage, and the Packers responded in kind, but they just went a little bit over the line. So Kevin King was whistled for pass interference on a critical third down with 1:46 to go, and that sealed the win for the Buccaneers. But overall, defensive holding calls are way down. Okay, they're about 2/3 of what they were in 2019. And we generally see referees call penalties less frequently in the Super Bowl than we do during the rest of the season. And we've had 16 Super Bowls without a single illegal contact penalty. So you can expect the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to grab hold of, interfere with, clutch, clasp, grab, and hold on to the Kansas City Chiefs because we don't have much rational reason to believe that the refs are going to call that. So this applies in life. Don't just think about rules as they are on the books. Think about rules as they are enforced. So if you're competing with people who are getting away with all sorts of violations of rules on the books, then you're a sucker. Now, there may be some spiritual benefits to continue to play by the rules on the books, even though nobody's enforcing the rules on the books. But it just means you're going to lose, right? On Sunday, the game is not going to end in peace, love, and dope. The Super Bowl is not going to end in a tie. Both teams are not going to be winners. One team's going to win, one team's going to lose. And a team that abides simply by the letter of the law rather than abiding by how the refs are calling the game is much more likely to lose. So we're going to have massive increase in offensive line holding up front, and we can expect a massive increase over a typical Super Bowl in the defensive backs and safeties and linebackers holding on to receivers. And it will be particularly necessary for Tampa Bay to see if they can get away with this because Kansas City is so fast. And this is based on a Bill Barnwell essay on ESPN.com. And his colleague Kevin Seifert wrote before the playoffs began, "Want an advantage? NFL playoff teams hold on every play because officials aren't calling it. Hold the defensive player in front of you like there's no tomorrow." He's talking here for offensive linemen. So Go ahead and grab, tackle, hook, and jerk, twist him, turn him, pull him to the ground, use all the material restrictions the NFL rulebook claims to outlaw. Do it for the competitive edge and do it with a clear conscience because, trust me, they ain't calling it. So the NFL has, without any warning, without any discussion, without putting anyone on notice, they have massively reinterpreted the definition of both offensive holding and defensive holding in a way that impacts the outcome of the game and will probably play a role in the outcome of the Super Bowl. So we've got dramatic reduction in offensive holding flags and defensive holding flags. So did offensive and defensive players just abruptly stop holding in 2020? Hell no. I mean, you look at go to the videotape, you'll find blatant, obvious holds going uncalled all the time. Now, did the officiating crews forget what holding looks like? Of course not. So NFL officials have calibrated their calls to what the NFL demands. So NFL officials have that skill. They respond to marching orders. So we're in a weird situation with the COVID-19 pandemic, and there have been certain trade-offs, all right? So the game has changed, and the game of life changes all the time, and you're not always going to be given notice. You're not always going to be called in for a discussion. There's not going to always be a public debate. You're not always going to get the handout, but life is constantly changing around you, right? So you have to notice the law as it is enforced, as it operates, not just the law as it is booked. Like the Los Angeles Rams, Aaron Donald, defensive lineman, Houston Texans, J.J. Watt, they talked all season about how difficult it was to get holding calls. Aaron Donald, the league's most difficult player to block, went more than a month without having a single holding flag thrown against the player blocking him. And he tells people, I'm just getting held all the time. This is impacting the running game as well. Ball carriers are averaging nearly 3 yards before first contact with defenders. That's the highest rate and the highest jump from one season to the next since ESPN Stats began tracking this in 2009. So how do you give running backs a cleaner runway? You hold. You grip, grab, hold, twist, turn. So the game changes. Life changes on you. And you can't just rely on the handout. You can't just rely on the terms of service. You can't just rely on what you're told. You have to notice the way the real world works. Yeah, holding is an arbitrary call. It requires judgment. Holding could be called every play. But there's been a dramatic reduction in the number of holding calls this year without any public notice, without any public discussion. And you think the referees are doing this against the NFL's wishes? No, they are calibrating their calls to what the NFL wants. And so it's the same in business, right? If you're competing with people who aren't paying taxes with the fidelity you are, and they're not getting penalized, then they're going to get outcompeted. So laws on the books are one thing. Completely different thing is how they are applied in real life. So when I discuss religion with people on this show, people usually want to talk about theory. So I had Adam Green on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he was all about the theory. There's this teaching. So one rabbi said something 1,800 years ago or 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago or 50 years ago. Somehow this is terribly significant. It's far more significant from Adam Green's perspective than what Jews actually do. So there's ideology, there's what a rabbi says here and what a rabbi says there. But if you want to know how Jews actually operate, you can't just go to sayings in this or that book, on this or that speech by this or that rabbi. Right? A rabbi can say anything. But how Jews actually behave is a completely different category. And it is it's not determined always by what individual rabbis say. Okay, this is John Mearsheimer on the future of the liberal international order.
For inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and John Ikenberry, both University of Chicago PhDs. And I only wish that I was physically present at the Naval Academy instead of doing this virtually, but maybe another day. I think that in answering your questions, I will give a talk that could be placed under the rubric of the rise and fall of the liberal international order. And it's important to understand, and I think for most of the midshipmen watching this exchange, this will be hard to comprehend, but in the early 1990s, when the Cold War ended, there was a huge amount of optimism in the United States about America's position in the world, about American foreign policy, and about the liberal international order. In fact, that optimism, I would argue, is reflected in John Ikenberry's classic book, After Victory. If you look at After Victory, which I would encourage you to do, John basically makes the argument that we have found the magic formula for making the liberal international order work for as far as the eye can see. And moreover, it's going to be a really happy time ahead. We're in the era of peace, love, and dope. Realism is effectively dead, right? The liberal international order is here to stay. As you all know, something went badly wrong along the way, not in the 1990s, but it began to happen in the early 2000s. And 2016 was really the critical year. Two things happened in 2016 that indicated that the liberal international order was in serious trouble. One was Brexit. And then number two was the election of Donald Trump. I'm not going to talk much about this now, but it's very important to understand that Donald Trump ran against the liberal international order. He hated the liberal international order. He was elected in 2016, and absent COVID, he would have been reelected in 2020. And indeed, even with COVID, if he had acted like an adult over the past year, he would have gotten reelected. And again, he ran against the liberal international order. And then there's Brexit. And my basic argument is the liberal international order is history. It's over, folks. And my argument, as I'll make clear as I go along here, is that it was doomed from the get-go because it contained the seeds of its own destruction. Now, let me start off by...
So you'll read many academics, many intellectuals who discuss democracy as though it's inevitable. So Francis Fukuyama published a famous essay circa 1990 about the end of history, that there was now no alternative to liberal democracy, that the world was inevitably turning towards liberal democracy. And yeah, there were some outliers here and there, such as among Arab Islamic states, but there was no ideologically, not philosophically, not morally, there was tenably no alternative to liberal democracy. And I saw a similar sentiment in a Nathan Kofnas academic paper a few months ago about how the world was steadily marching towards democracy. And in 2007, the world has steadily become less democratic and less liberal. Each year, 2008 has been less liberal, less democratic than 2007. 2009 was less liberal and democratic than 2008. So now we had a coup in Myanmar, formerly Burma, where the army's taken back control instead of having a democracy. So steadily around the world, every year, we're steadily becoming less democratic, more authoritarian, more nationalistic, and less liberal. So for those who believe that history is marching inevitably towards liberal democracy, it's simply not true. And it's steadily, clearly, demonstrably, year by year, the trend is away from liberal democracy. And it's been that way for 13 years, and there's absolutely no reason to believe that this trend will change anytime soon.
By defining what exactly the liberal international order is, because John and I have some differences here that are reasonably important. Then let me talk a little bit about the history of the liberal international order, and then go to the meat and potatoes of my talk, which is why it failed, why all that optimism has now turned into abject pessimism, and then say just a few words about where we're headed. Let me define the liberal international order by first defining what an order is. It's very important that you understand exactly what an order is. An order is basically an organized group of international institutions that helps govern relations among the members and helps those members deal with other countries that are not in the order itself. So an order is a compilation of institutions. If you think of the Cold War order in the West, right? We had NATO, we had the IMF, we had the World Bank. These were all institutions. And these institutions were cobbled together to form an order. And you also want to remember that institutions are basically rules. There's widespread agreement on that point in the literature. So orders are a conglomeration of rules. And the reason that orders are so important, the reason that rules are so important, is because in an incredibly complicated and interdependent world like the one we live in, you just need rules for states to deal with each other. If NATO is an institution and NATO is all about rules, what's going on there is that you need NATO so you have clear rules on how the members of NATO interact with each other, especially if they have to fight a war against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. We are consigned to having an order of one sort or another for as far as the eye can see. Because again, we live in a highly interdependent and complicated world where we need rules. So institutions are rules. And
okay, and this is some video to watch in the background. This is a woman doing her workout video while there's a Myanmar, Burma coup going on, being prepared in the background. So
orders are basically an organized group of institutions. Now, what about an international order? And here's where John and I have some disagreement. For me, an international order has to include all the great powers in the system to be international. Otherwise, it's a bounded order. So to get ahead of myself, when I talk about the Cold War order in the West was not an international order because it didn't include the Soviet Union or the Soviet allies or China for most of the Cold War. It was a bounded order. And my argument is that after 1990, when we were in the unipolar moment and there was only one great power, which was the United States, obviously, we had an international order. So I distinguish between bounded orders, which don't include all the great powers, and international orders, which include all the great powers. Then very importantly, we get to the word liberal. What is a liberal international order? I've told you what an order is, right? I've told you what an international order is versus a bounded order. Now let me tell you what I think a liberal international order is. The leading state has to be a liberal democracy. And indeed, you need a number of important players in that order to be liberal democracies, right? To have a liberal international order. Furthermore, you want to pay a lot of attention to the question of what are the goals of the liberal international order. There are basically three goals. One is obviously to spread liberal democracy all over the planet. If you want to have a liberal international order that includes every state on the planet, in an ideal world, every state would be a liberal democracy. Number two, you want to promote an open international economy, and you want to integrate every state into that open international economy. In a very important way, what you want to do is you want to get them hooked on capitalism. You want to create a lot of economic interdependence. And then thirdly, you want to rely heavily on institutions, and you want to integrate states, especially all the great powers in the system, into those institutions so that they become responsible stakeholders. They obey the rules. Remember, institutions are rules, right? And this is what we wanted to do with China and with Russia after 1990. We wanted to integrate them into those international institutions.
Okay, so in the 21st century, all the incentives are going to be pushing America away from maintaining an international order. And so if you want to read more about this, check out Michael Beckley's great book, Unrivaled, Why America Will Remain the World's Sole Superpower. So February 22nd of 2020, he responded to a roundtable of international relations scholars who had various criticisms of his book. So Michael Beckley notes, no other country is close to developing this capacity, which means that your country can fight major conventional wars beyond its home region. So only the United States of America can do that right now. Russia can't do that. China can't do that. China hasn't fought a war since 1979. Germany can't do it. Japan can't do it. Okay, so there are three benchmarks: economic, technological, and military, that a country would need to pass before it can be considered a rival power to the United States. China's not even achieved the first of these benchmarks, economic, and it will fall further behind in the coming decades. So China could temporarily deny the United States sea and air control within a few hundred miles of the Chinese coastline, but China would have trouble sustaining major combat operations anywhere beyond its shores in a limited war in East Asia, let alone in an all-out war on the high seas. So even by Soviet standards, China has a ways to go. During the Cold War, the Soviet economy was roughly 60% the size of the US economy in dollar terms, just as China's is today. But Soviet per capita incomes were 50% of America's, whereas China's today are only 20%. Soviet technology was on par with US technology in many military relevant sectors, whereas Chinese military certain pockets of excellence, such as in Chinese military technology, is like their wonderful consumer products. They suck. They lag far behind US standards. Soviet Union outspent the United States on defense, fielded a massive army that could potentially overrun Central Europe. Today, China spends several times less on defense than the United States. China couldn't even conquer Taiwan, all right, let alone overrun East Asia. So China today is much weaker relative to the United States than the Soviet Union was during the Cold War. The fourth industrial revolution is going to work to the United States' advantage. America dominates the industries that comprise it, accounting for 3 to 6 times China's share of value added in artificial intelligence, computing, data analytics, robotics, biotechnology, nanotechnology, alternative energy, medical technology, and aerospace and other industries of the future. So let's say you're a pioneer or that you're, a deep thinker in any of these fields. Where would you want to go? Would you want to go to Germany? Would you want to go to Japan, Russia, China? No. If you want to be the best in your field, in all likelihood, you want to come to the United States of America. That's where you're going to get more economic payoff and you're going to have more freedom. And Americans, compared to pretty much any other country in the world, has less of the tall poppy syndrome. So the tall poppy syndrome is anyone who excels, we want to cut them off at the knees to bring them back down to earth. So America has less of that syndrome than any other country of which I'm aware. So in the second machine age, in which robots perform the lion's share of routine tasks, and people must be capable of high-level thinking or creativity to find meaningful employment, well, the United States is going to excel far more than any other country. China relies much more heavily than does the United States on massive low-skill employment. You know that China uses 30% of its workforce to try to feed itself, right? 30%. And they still can't do it. Even with 30% of their workforce in agriculture, they still can't feed themselves. Americans can feed themselves with less than 1% of their workforce in agriculture. China's arable land is steadily shrinking because they have so abused their environment, far more than America has. China has about 6 times the pollution problems of the United States, and it's just getting worse. The average Chinese citizen receives half the years of schooling of the average American. And you think, oh, the Chinese, they're so smart. Well, 1/3 of Chinese children entering the workforce having IQ below 90. That's the result of malnutrition. They can't even feed themselves, even though they have 30% of their workforce in agriculture. So a third of their kids have an IQ below 90 because of malnutrition, poor care, rampant pollution. I mean, China is completely unprepared for the new economy. Now, the American political system is clearly a mess, but China's political system is so much worse. I mean, the United States is a flawed democracy, but China is essentially run by a mafia. It's run by a dictator for life. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party systematically sacrifices economic efficiency to maintain political control. So private firms generate most of China's wealth, but state-owned enterprises receive 80% of the loans and the subsidies. So all these state zombie firms are propped up by the Chinese Communist Party at enormous expense, while private firms are starved of capital. And how do entrepreneurs in China spend their time? They spend up to 80% of their time on average just trying to schmooze Chinese Communist Party officials so that they can get some of those few loans. In America, American entrepreneurs, spend less than 1% of their time trying to schmooze politicians. Now, as America becomes increasingly dominant, why should it or will it maintain engagement abroad? So it may want to maintain some standing in the Middle East by China and other powers' dominance in that area. And they may want to maintain some status in Taiwan to deny that island to China. Now, America could probably improve its relative position by adopting an America First policy and letting the world burn. But because America has such unrivaled power, it may be able to afford to pursue absolute gains, sacrifice a little bit of relative advantage to make America and the world better off overall. So as the most secure and powerful country in history, perhaps the United States power. Now, will other countries suffer more than the United States from the collapse of the liberal international order? Yes. But if the United States completely disengages from the world, that means a nasty and brutish world of rigid trade blocs, closed borders, a splintered internet, militarized sea lanes, fewer democracies, more nuclear proliferation, higher likelihood of major war, and a lower likelihood of collective action on transnational issues such as COVID.
Institutions that existed. So they became responsible stakeholders. Now, the final point I want to make, which has been implicit in what I've said up to now, in my opinion, you need unipolarity to have a liberal international order. If you have more than one great power in the system, i.e. if you have bipolarity or multipolarity, those great powers are going to compete with each other for security. You're going to get balance of power politics, realpolitik, and you can't have a liberal international order. You need unipolarity. Okay, now let me go to the second part of my talk, which is briefly talk about the history. And here I think you'll see that John and I just have a slightly different view of the history. John believes that the liberal international order was created in 45 and existed up to at least 2017. Maybe he believes it still exists today. I believe that the liberal international order was created in roughly 1990. And what you had between 1945 and 1989 was a world that was dominated by two bounded orders that were realist to the core. One was an order that was dominated by the Soviet Union. It included institutions like the Warsaw Pact and Comecon on one side. And on the other side, you had a Western order, an order that was led by the United States that included institutions like NATO, the IMF, the World Bank, GATT, so forth and so on, that was mainly concerned with waging a security competition with the Soviet Union. So I believe that you did not have a meaningful, a thick international order during the Cold War. What you had were two bounded orders that were not international and were not.
Okay, so there's a comment in the chat that you can define whether you're winning or losing at life by how many views you get on your YouTube videos. And that's absurd. The types of videos that get the most hits easily and instantly are those that appeal to a low IQ audience. If you tell your audience what it wants to hear, if you tell them, oh, the 2020 election was stolen, you tell them that COVID was just the flu, if you stoke QAnon conspiracy theories, if you stoke conspiracy theories in general, you will attract a large audience of losers. It's losers who are attracted to that type of thinking. So you compare like a Mark Shapiro video, and Mark Shapiro is one of the major scholars of modern Jewish thought, and he'll make a video, and after a week, he'll typically have fewer than 100 views. On the other hand, you can have Rabbi Yaron Ruvain or Yosef Mizrahi release a video, and they'll get 5,000 views overnight. Well, Mizrahi and Ruvain are appealing to a low IQ rabble. So numbers don't equal quality. In fact, numbers and quality are often inversely related. So you can create a toxic product, feeding people's worst instincts. Just, feed them slop like pigs, and they'll eat it up. But you're creating, toxic habits, toxic directions in your own life. You're appealing to the worst in people, and you're not going to like the consequences. It's not a long-term winning strategy. So instead, I have tried to focus on building up a community of responsible adults. So the quality of the people who watch this show is unparalleled. I mean, I'm talking people in prestigious positions in the world watch this show, and they network with people on this show, and they employ people from this community, and they go to bed with people from this community, and they invest with each other from this community. Because by and large, if someone's a regular member of this show, they're going to be trustworthy, they're going to be intelligent, they're going to be thoughtful, they're not going to be into stupid conspiracy theories, they're not going to be self-destructive, they're going to be pro-social, and they're the type of people that you want to have around. So you can appeal to the worst in people and get a much larger audience than if you appeal to the best in humans.
Liberal. Then what happens is that the Cold War ends and the Soviet-led order goes down the toilet bowl. It just disappears. It's gone. In fact, the Soviet Union is gone by December 1991. And we won. This is why we were so optimistic. And what we do then in the early 1990s is we take that Western-led bounded order and we expand it into, or we attempt to expand it into a liberal international order. And my point to you is we can do that, the United States can do that because it's the unipole. It doesn't have to worry about great power competition. By definition, there's only one great power in the system. So great power competition, realpolitik, is taken off the table for the United States, and it's free to pursue an ideological agenda, also known as a liberal agenda, and it's in a position to take that Western bounded order and turn it into a liberal international order. And if you look at things like NATO expansion, EU expansion, the promotion of the color revolutions in Eastern Europe, this is all part and parcel of our effort to take that Western order and make it into an international order. And not a realist order, but a liberal order. Because we don't need to worry about realism.
So life can be complicated, and people want to reduce things down to a magic key. So if you read Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler, he wanted to reduce all the complexities of history and reality and great power politics down to one magic key. Just look for Jewish influence. And so this simplistic desire for one magic key to understand how the world works is enormously appealing to people who are fragile, who are not willing to wrestle with reality, for people who just, they're failing at life, and so they can't handle that, and so they want an excuse for why their life sucks. And so if you can blame the Federal Reserve, or if you can blame the media, or you can blame the Jews, and the comment in the chat, oh, Luke's okay, but he doesn't deal with the JQ. I deal with the JQ probably more than any other streamer. Who's done more on the JQ than me over the past few years? Like, I'll talk to, discuss, debate anyone on the JQ. Like, there's no one out there who like intimidates me or frightens me or scares me on this question. That's not like they're like facts or theories. It's like, oh, I can't deal with that. I got to shield myself from that. I got to shield the audience from that. But why do people believe in ridiculous conspiracy theories? Because they meet their psychological needs, right? People need to feel special, right? People need to feel, hey, I've got this magic key that unlocks how the world works. And so they seize, on these ridiculous magic keys, whether it's QAnon or the JQ or whatever it is, but they so need to feel special that they're just like, they got this great psychological need. Oh, give me a magic key that unlocks how the world works. Like, or people feel tremendous anxiety, and people go through life with tremendous amounts of fear, and so they need certainty. They need to feel safe and secure, and believing something ridiculous like QAnon, somehow that temporarily solves their fear. So when people feel powerless and when people feel scared, they are the most vulnerable to believing ridiculous conspiracy theories. And then you can never discount the need to feel special compared to other people. I've got the magic key. I understand the JQ. Everyone else are just a bunch of cucks and weaklings and wimps. But, I'm willing to look the reality of the world, straight on. I'm willing to stare into the abyss of Jewish power. So why do conspiracy theories seduce? It's not through the power of the argument. It's through the intensity of the passions that they stir up. That's why Richard Spencer is such a great live streamer. It's not because the profundity of his arguments. It's through the intensity of the emotions that he arouses. Most of these more successful dissident right streamers like Academic Agent, remember, he was proclaiming just that Donald Trump would have the second term, even after it was obvious that Joe Biden won the election, just saying all sorts of ridiculous things. But he has an enormous audience because he creates really powerful emotions, because he sounds very intelligent. He's got that British accent. So apparently, I suppose he's got a PhD, so he is intelligent, but he obviously doesn't know anything about American politics, even though he's got hundreds of hours on American politics. But he creates these intense passions in people, or he feeds into people's need for, moral certainty about the reality of the world. Now, he's completely wrong about all sorts of things, like, blitheringly oblivious, like just a complete fool and buffoon. But he gets an enormous audience because he feeds the slop that the pigs want to consume. So why do people believe what they believe? Because it creates the emotions that they want to feel, makes them feel safe, makes them feel intense, makes them feel strong, right? People who are failing at life are going to be filled with resentment. They're going to be filled with indignation. They're going to be filled with disillusionment and disenchantment and fear. And they need some stories about good and evil. And they need some way of explaining their own failures so that they are not responsible. And so conspiracy theories meet those emotional needs. There's an excellent article on QAnon conspiracy theories in the New York Times this week by Thomas Edsall. So one particularly popular conspiracy theory is that the world is this giant struggle between the corrupt elites versus the people. Okay, now elites come from the people, right? They're not a different creature. So populism, like all politics, it can appeal to the best in people or to the worst in people. Like every type of ideology comes with good sides and downsides. The downside of populism is that it can predispose people to ludicrous conspiracy thinking, such as that the world is a struggle between corrupt elites versus, the good, God-fearing, honest, regular folk. The Donald Trump populist movement is focused on fear, and that there are reasons to be afraid, but some people's fears get the better of them. And so people are looking for, some simple magic key to explain complex problems. People don't want to do the work to understand the complexity of the world around them. It's like, give me simple answers that'll explain, all these complex things going on in the world around me, and you'll find dozens of streamers who are willing to just feed slop to you. If you want to be a pig, there are all these dissident right streamers who will feed you slop, right? And you can just put your snout in the trough and you can just lap up this low IQ, ridiculous conspiracy thinking. And you can even get it with a British accent. And you will temporarily feel like it's kind of solving your fears. So conspiracy theories tend to be alarm systems, and they're psychological coping mechanisms to deal with threat and to deal with your fears. So you'll be particularly prone to believing in conspiracy theories when you're suffering loss, when you're feeling weak, when you're feeling separated from other people, when you're feeling alone, when you're feeling small in a big world, when you're feeling desperate, when everything you try is falling apart. Then you'll be particularly likely to seize on to some ridiculous conspiracy theory like the JQ or QAnon or 5G electrical rays changing people's minds. People are also much more likely to endorse conspiracy theories when their political side loses. So it was the dominant narrative among dissident right streamers that the 2020 election was stolen. No evidence for that. But people could not deal with reality. They could not deal that Donald Trump had lost. And so they all just seized on this ridiculous theory that the 2020 election was stolen. So if Donald Trump had won, people would be much less concerned on the right about electoral fraud. And Donald Trump, let's be honest, he pretty much governed as a loser, as did Barack Obama. Barack Obama governed for 2 terms, 8 years. Donald Trump governed for 4 years, and they talked as though they'd lost the election, that they were just these prophets from the border. Even though they had the most powerful position in the world, they talked as though they didn't have any power and that they were fighting on behalf of the people. They were on your side fighting the power, right? The most powerful people in the world. Barack Obama as president, Donald Trump as president. They were telling you essentially through their tweets that they were fighting against the real power, that, why doesn't the attorney general do something? Or we've got these nefarious financial forces or these nefarious cultural elite forces who are destroying our country. And even though I'm president of the United States, I don't have any power. I'm a loser. That's how both Barack Obama and Donald Trump governed. I mean, Trump insisted that he won the popular vote in 2016 if it had not been for widespread electoral fraud. QAnon followers tend to be both extremist politically in that they want to overthrow the US government, and they tend to be extremist psychologically. So these things go together. So I remember when I was talking in therapy about 5 years ago, my therapist suggested, is the reason that you have such extreme politics is because you're so passive in your daily life. And there's a lot to it. I know from conversations I have online, the people who have the most extreme politics tend to earn the least money. So people earning $11 an hour, $12 an hour, $15 an hour, they want a dictatorship. People, on the other hand, who are earning over $50 an hour, they want to work within a democratic system. So a lot of people are completely passive in their real life. Like they have spouses who don't want to have sex with them. They have bosses who abuse them. They're overweight. They can't get any traction with their savings. They can't get any traction with their life goals. So their life feels fragile and failing. As a consequence, they develop all these antisocial personality traits. And so they tend to be both extremists psychologically and then also extremists in their politics. And as polarization increases, tensions between the political parties will rise. People will be more willing to construct and to believe in fantastical ideas that malign outgroups, such as Democrats are a bunch of Satan worshiping pedophiles, or conspiracy theories that bolster the in-group. We only lost because you cheated. So conspiracy theories will raise the temperature of polarization, make it more difficult for people from different partisan and ideological camps to have fact-based discussions about the world around them. So that's why it's so important to get multiple sources of information. I love dissident thought, but I also want to read the mainstream. I want to read the LA Times, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post every day, and also read Steve Saylor, read dissident thinkers, and read academics in the mainstream who rebut them. And sometimes I side with the dissidents, sometimes I side with the hierarchy.
We're the only great power on the planet. And what happens is that this enterprise is actually quite successful in the 1990s. John's book comes out, his classic book, After Victory, comes out in 2001, and John looks kind of like a genius. People are thinking that, he's really nailed this one. But as I said to you before, by 2016, the liberal international order is in real trouble. Now, what you want to ask yourself is what went wrong? And as John Mearsheimer said to you at the start of his talk, this whole enterprise contained the seeds of its own destruction. Now, what exactly do I mean? Let me point out 4 ways in which this enterprise was doomed from the start. First of all, it ended up turning China into a great power. The idea was, John talked about the liberal bet. The idea was that we were going to help China grow economically, make it prosperous, get it hooked on capitalism, make it really rich, and turn it into a responsible stakeholder. We were going to integrate it into institutions like the WTO. From a realist point of view, this was insanity. You will realize, all you midshipmen who are going to spend the rest of your life worrying about the China threat, that the foreign policy elites in the United States created this threat. Or let's put it differently, they helped create this threat. They created, on purpose, a really powerful China because they were betting that it would be a responsible stakeholder. Can you believe that? And their bet failed. And now we're facing Godzilla. No realist in his right mind would have ever done such a foolish thing. But anyway, the point is, we helped China grow. And the end result is we no longer live in a unipolar world.
So the most successful alt-right online personality for the past 6 months is Gypsy Crusader. And so do you think he's on a great trajectory with his life, openly talking about committing mass genocide, making the case for mass genocide? So for many dissident streamers, whether on the right or the left, they're saying all sorts of things online that are at war with and contradict their real life. And so this can lead to like temporary blips in popularity, but then it leads to countless humiliation. So people think that because they get thousands of views on YouTube, that somehow that they are people of great significance. But what happens is people simply lose touch with reality.
Like a fucking 100 times. I am so mad. I am so fucking mad at these people. They don't do this to fucking me. We're gonna fucking ritualistically humiliate them. I am coming back here every fucking weekend if I have to. Like, this is never over. I win, they fucking lose. That's how the world fucking works. Little fucking kikes. They get ruled by people like me. Little fucking octoroons. My ancestors fucking enslaved those pieces of fucking shit. We're gonna win. I rule the fucking world. Those pieces of shit get ruled by people like me. They look up and see a face like mine looking down at them. That's how the fucking world works. We are going to destroy this fucking...
Okay, so the chat says, Age of Treason owned you, Luke. How? What exactly, how exactly did he own me? That's the interesting thing, talking to people who hate Jews, is that they perceive themselves as so rational, but the moment you start trying to have a rational conversation, they just erupt in all these emotional outbursts. They don't allow you to speak. They have to constantly interrupt you. They just lose their temper. I mean, that was the thing that was stunning just how quickly they lose their temper and just erupt. They can't handle a rational discussion. They just got to like cut it off right there. And their hatred is beyond any reason or anything that can be empirically measured. It's just purely a faith statement. So some people believe that Jesus is God. Other people believed that God led the Israelites through the Red Sea and then drowned the Egyptians. So a lot of different people have their faith statements. And for some people, they have a major faith statement that Jews are responsible for 99% of troubles in the world. That's what Eric Stryker believes. He believes Jews are responsible for 99% of trouble in the world, even in countries where Jews are less than 0.5% of the population. Still, they're so powerful and the non-Jews are so weak and pathetic that the problems in those countries are also the responsibility of its microscopic Jewish population.
In fact, Vladimir Putin, who comes online in the early 2000s, basically resurrects the Russians from the dead. So now we're in a multipolar world. It's not only the Chinese, it's the Russians as well. My point to you early on, and you cannot underestimate the importance of this point, you cannot have a liberal international order in a multipolar world. You just can't do that. You need unipolarity. And furthermore, do you really think that China is a liberal state that's going to be happy with a liberal international order? I would not bet a lot of money on that, I'll tell you that. They have no interest in a liberal international order, right? So what we did with China doomed the liberal international order. That's point one. Secondly, we were heavily into the business of spreading democracy across the planet. And this got us, and it got the liberal international order into real trouble. First of all, we ended up fighting all these unnecessary and losing wars. And the amount of murder and mayhem that we're responsible for creating in the greater Middle East is truly stunning, right? And we get into wars in places like Afghanistan, the longest war in American history. We're going to lose. We got into a war in Iraq. We lost. We made a colossal mess of Libya. We've helped make a colossal mess of Syria. We were really great at spreading liberal democracy in the Middle East. And of course, that's what the Bush Doctrine was all about. So we ended up fighting all these unnecessary wars that we lost. And that did a lot, as John pointed out, to discredit the liberal international order. Furthermore, we couldn't fight wars against China and Russia, but we tried to spread democracies into those two countries as well. And you know what? They didn't like it at all. You all know that the United States does not like the idea of the Russians interfering in our elections. The idea of the Russians interfering in American politics is anathema to us. Well, don't you think that the Soviets and the Chinese feel that the United States interfering in their domestic politics and trying to spread democracy and promote human rights in Russia and China is a violation of their sovereignty? That's exactly what they think. So this liberal international order not only led to these unnecessary wars in the greater Middle East, it also helped poison relations with Russia and China and gave them all sorts of incentives to undermine the liberal international order. Third, globalization. Globalization did a terrific job at wealth creation. There's no doubt about it. And it did a lot to help countries all around the world, especially China. That was my point before. And globalization made the American elite rich.
So IQ is important, but IQ does not guarantee a successful life. So high IQ people can believe ridiculous things. Richard Spencer is a high IQ person, but he clearly lost hold of reality in that rant I played earlier. So just because someone believes in conspiracy theories, it doesn't necessarily mean they're low IQ. Generally speaking, less intelligent people are more prone to believing in ridiculous conspiracy theories. But many high IQ people have psychological problems as well. If they can't deal with the complexities of the modern world, they're very likely to retreat into ridiculous conspiracy theories to try to assuage their anxiety and fear and to provide reasons for why they're failing at life, but not because of anything I did, bro. Not because I took too many drugs. Not because I haven't made responsible decisions. No, it's those dastardly elites. They're responsible for my troubles.
John and I and Ed, we're all much richer as a result of globalization and what the liberal international order did. But there are huge numbers of Americans in the lower classes and even in the middle class who did not benefit from globalization, who did not benefit from the liberal international order. And many of these people are Trump voters. They are really angry. They're angry about the tremendous inequality, economic inequality in America, and they're angry about the fact they lost their jobs and can't find better jobs or new jobs. Right? So globalization, it might have helped China become a peer competitor, but and it might have helped people who are well off to begin with, like us.
And the chat says, because the JQ is a conspiracy theory. Well, yes, on the literal level, the JQ is a conspiracy theory. The Jewish question is, can Jews become citizens? That's the original meaning of the Jewish question. So that question was much discussed in England, France. Skeptical, but today in 2021, very few Americans will argue to you that Jews cannot be American. Very few English will argue to you that Jews cannot become English. Very few Australians will argue with you that Jews cannot be Australian. And relatively few French or Germans or Dutch or people in Sweden or Norway or Finland will argue with you that Jews cannot become citizens of their nation. So as far as the original literal meaning of the Jewish question, yeah, it's been answered. Asked and answered. Virtually nobody in the first world today, beyond generally a bunch of losers, question whether or not Jews can be American citizens. Now, if you want to extend the Jewish question to does particularly, say, Jewish influence in one sector of society, is it shifting that sector in a liberal direction or in a direction that's not in the interests of the majority of the citizens? That's a secondary meaning of the Jewish question, where you can have many different opinions. But as far as the traditional meaning of the question, its original meaning in its context, it has been asked and it has been answered.
Become wealthier, but for your average American, it did not do one whole heck of a lot. Then finally, there's the question of open borders. You want to understand that the liberal international order promotes open borders. The famous Schengen Agreement in Europe is a manifestation of this. The way liberals talk about the border with Mexico today, right? The liberal worldview trends to treat everybody as part of an international community and doesn't privilege the importance of borders and is open to all sorts of illegal immigration and so forth and so on. This is bound to cause trouble in a world where nationalism is a really powerful force. You see this reflected in the Brexit vote. And again, you see this reflected in support for Donald Trump. You cannot have open borders or anything approximating open borders in a world where the most powerful political ideology on the planet is nationalism. So all of these different factors came together. Globalization, the spreading of democracy, open borders, and the rise of...
Right. So people often think that, oh, we have a new party in power, therefore all sorts of policies are going to change, and some policies will change, but politicians have to deal with reality. So the late British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan was asked what will determine the success of your administration. And he said, events, my dear boy, events. Things will happen. Donald Trump would have been reelected if not for COVID. Donald Trump would have still been reelected with COVID if he'd acted like an adult, as John Mearsheimer noted. But the combination of COVID and Donald Trump's childlike idiocy at times stopped his reelection. Without that extraordinary event, Trump would have had a second term. So events come along, and politicians then have to wrestle with them. And the way that incentives work in democracy is that to get elected, you have to promise all sorts of things that you couldn't possibly fulfill.
China to doom the liberal international order. Now, the question is, where are we headed? My basic view as to where we are headed is that we're going to end up in a situation that is somewhat analogous to what we had during the Cold War. You're going to have an American-dominated order on one side, and you're going to have a Chinese-dominated order on the other side. And those two orders are going to be principally concerned with waging competition with each other. This is not to say you won't have a lot of cooperation inside each of those bounded orders. And note the word I'm using here, folks. It's a bounded order, a Chinese-led bounded order and an American-led bounded order. You'll have cooperation inside those orders, just as you had cooperation during the Cold War inside the American-led Western order and the Soviet-led Eastern order. But in terms of how those orders interact with each other, that's where the security competition will take place.
Okay, so we are headed for an illiberal 21st century, meaning less democracy, fewer human rights, less international cooperation, right? These are the clear trend lines, and we've seen them very clearly, empirically, every year since 2007. The world's become less democratic, had less emphasis on human rights, had less international cooperation, and it's only going to become more like that, even though the rhetoric that the Biden administration uses will be different than the rhetoric that the Trump administration uses. But the policies in international relations will be a continuation of America First. And Michael Beckley writes in Foreign Affairs, rogue superpower, why this could be a neoliberal American century. So Donald Trump came into office promising to overhaul U.S. foreign policy. He scorned allies. He withdrew the United States from many international agreements. He slapped tariffs on friends and foes alike. And the elites, generally speaking, hated Trump's America First policy. They saw it as a violation of the liberal international order, the sets of institutions and norms that have generally governed world politics since the end of World War II, but particularly since the fall of the Soviet Union, 1990. Now, most of our elites hope that Trump, having left the Oval Office, the United States will be able to resume its role as the leader of the liberal world order. Well, it's not going to happen. The liberal U.S. hegemony is an artifact of the Cold War's immediate afterglow. So Trump's transactional approach to foreign policy, meaning I'll do this for you if you do this for me, has been the norm for most of American history. So Trump's America First policy, that's how America has usually operated. And so Trump's imprint and the America First philosophy will last long after Trump has left the scene, because Americans like America First policies. Americans don't want American involvement overseas. They don't want Americans dying in Afghanistan and Iraq. So America First nationalism, the appeal of that will grow stronger in the years ahead because of two main global trends. We've got rapid population aging and the rise of automation. So these trends are going to accelerate. They're going to completely remake international power dynamics, all in ways that favor the United States. Now, it's interesting, like every dissident right streamer, like Richard Spencer, Keith Woods, I just hear people on the dissident right go on and on about how America's collapsing. Edward Dutton talks about, America is going to be headed for secession. It ain't true. Like, I know that captures people's imagination. Like, we're talking here on the border. Okay, we're not running institutions in the center. All right, in the center, you have the big institutions and the elites, and it's hierarchical and people run them. We're talking out on the border. And on the border, the emotional tone is usually one of nihilistic rage and a sense of cataclysm. All right, so dissidents talk to people who have, enormous amounts of rage and a sense of cataclysm. Right, that's what life on the border is like. But it leads you to just as many delusions as being in the center, where you're running things and you're afraid of ever saying anything that could cause you to fall out of touch with the other elites. And so you're in a big institution where 17 different people can say no to your ideas. Okay, so both people on the border, people in the center have tremendous fears, but very different fears. But we've got these two global trends: rapid population aging, the rise of automation, and this is only going to make America stronger compared to other nations. By 2040, the United States will be the only country with a large growing market and the fiscal capacity to sustain a global military presence. New U.S. technologies will steadily reduce U.S. dependence on foreign labor, on foreign imports, foreign resources. New technology will steadily equip the United States military with new tools to contain the territorial expansion of America's rivals. So America is headed, all evidence points towards America dominating the world over the next 50 years, more than it has even dominated the world the previous 70 years. America became the world's most powerful, most economically powerful nation in the 1880s. And America only got extensively involved in the world, however, after World War II. So since the end of World War II, the United States has seen itself as the chief defender of liberal democracy. And, we're bringing democracy to Iraq, and we're going to bring democracy to Afghanistan, and girls are going to get to go to school in Afghanistan. We're going to defend the liberal democratic capitalist way of life, and we're going to champion rules-based international systems based on these classically liberal values. We provide dozens of countries with military protection. We secure their shipping routes. We give them easy access to American dollars and American markets. And in exchange, those countries offer their loyalty and often liberalize their own economies and governments. every time America goes to war, Australia goes to war with it, not because necessarily Australia, for example, believes in going to war with Iraq and Afghanistan, but because Australia depends on American military protection, and it comes with a price. But coming decades, we're going to have rapid population aging, the rise of automation. This is going to reduce faith in democratic capitalism and liberal democracy, and will fracture the free world, because the burden of caring for older populations, the tremendous job losses that will result from new technology, will spur immense competition for resources and for markets. Aging and automation will lay bare the flaws of all sorts of international institutions that governments rely on to tackle common problems, and Americans will steadily feel less dependent on foreign partners. We don't need Middle East oil anymore. So the United States may well become a rogue superpower. Why? Because that will be in its interests. It will have less and less need for foreign partners and foreign resources. So in the 20th century, the American century was built on a liberal vision of the U.S. role in the world. But what we are witnessing today is the dawn of an illiberal American century, as personified by Donald Trump. But you'll see similar policies continue on, whether the party in power is Democratic or Republican.
As was the case during the Cold War. On top of that, you will have a thin international order. It won't be a liberal international order. That thin international order will include China and the United States and Russia, just as we had a thin international order during the Cold War that included the United States and the Soviet Union. But once you're in a world where you have two bounded orders that are engaged in security competition with each other, you're basically saying, in effect, that the liberal international order is no more. May it rest in peace. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John.
Okay, so here's Keith Woods. Keith Woods always sounds very intelligent. He is a highly intelligent National Socialist, but he's a young man, and he knows a lot of theory, doesn't know much reality.
Inflation, of stagnation, and at the same time, energy is becoming more of a problem in terms of moving to cleaner energy that's less efficient, that gives less of a return in terms of the diminishing returns on technology as it becomes sort of so advanced. You had that initial burst in the information age. A lot of people think that maybe diminishing past a certain point, there's only so sort of powerful you can make computers and so on before it requires a much greater investment to get the same kind of return. And what you may see is that at the same time as you have the real world economy, the productive economy struggling and declining, you still have this huge financial sector that isn't going to go away, and you're still going to have this big profit motive. And this could lead to what some have called catabolic capitalism. And this is from Craig Collins, from an article called Catabolism, Capitalism's Frightening Future. He says, in a growthless, contracting economy, the profit motive can have a powerful catabolic impact on capitalist society. The word catabolism comes from the Greek.
Okay, this is just nonsense, but because Keith Woods likes conspiracy theories, particularly about Jews, he's quite vulnerable to believing that cataclysm is at hand. Like Keith Woods, Richard Spencer, maybe Edward Dalton, they'd love this idea that cataclysm is at hand, that the United States is going to fall apart, that the American financial system is going to fall apart. They have an emotional need for this kind of collapse, and so they're not seeing the world as it is; they're seeing the world as they are. And so, I remember when I was about 7 years of age, there were 2 occasions, it might have been 6. There were 2 occasions when I deliberately lit fires outside my home. And why did I do that? I can't possibly fully get back into the head of this disturbed 6 or 7-year-old, but I was a very unhappy kid. Like, people said I looked like a Holocaust survivor. I just had deep sunken eyes, just a rage against the world. And my projection or my understanding of what was going on is that I wanted the rest of the world to burn just like I was burning up inside, that I wanted to destroy just like I felt destroyed inside. So you see this with a lot of dissident right streamers, that they have this tremendous sense of cataclysm. On the one hand, they have all these illusions about what government can possibly do in their Nazi fantasies, and then they have this tremendous sense of disappointment because reality is not matching up with their National Socialist fantasies, and so they feel like the end times are approaching. So they have this emotional need for perspectives that will fulfill their need for cataclysm. They have a romantic view of the world. Romantic means you see more in reality than is what is really there. So you had people like Keith Woods and Richard Spencer and pretty much everyone on the Dissident Right, of which I paid attention, who thought that the whole Wall Street bets thing indicated like the end of the American financial system, which is completely ludicrous. So Trump's America First policy is being essentially the way the United States is governed for most of its history. Right? Before 1945, the U.S. defined its interests quite narrowly, largely in terms of money and physical security. It pursued its interests aggressively. It had little regard for the effects of their behavior on the rest of the world. Now, in its rhetoric, it espoused liberal values such as freedom and liberty, but it applied them quite selectively. It formed no alliances beside the one it signed with France during the Revolutionary War. American tariffs until 1945 ranked among the highest in the world. America largely shunned international institutions. The United States was not quite isolationist, but its rampant territorial expansion inspired Adolf Hitler. Like, Hitler admired how ruthlessly the United States expanded. And the United States could afford to pursue its goals alone because it was self-sufficient, unlike all the other powerful countries. By the 1880s, the United States was the world's richest country, the world's largest consumer market, the leading manufacturer, the leading energy producer. It had vast natural resources and no major threats. We've just got Canada to the north of us, Mexico to the south of us, no threat. So the United States had no incentive for forging alliances abroad. The way the world works is the strong take what they want and the weak endure what they must. Now, during the Cold War, the Soviet military occupied large swaths of Europe and Asia. Communism attracted hundreds of millions of followers worldwide. By the early 1950s, Moscow had twice the military might of continental Western Europe, and communists ruled over 35% of the world's industrial resources. So the United States needed strong partners to contain these threats. So it bankrolled an alliance, and it provided dozens of countries with security guarantees and easy access to American markets. But once the Cold War ended by about 1990, Americans did not see the point of paying the price for U.S. global leadership, right? If you want to become, let's say you want to become mayor in your town, or you want to become a leader in your community, you're going to have to pay a tremendous price, and your wife and kids may not particularly like it. So Theodor Herzl started the modern variation of Zionism, and his family paid a tremendous price. Like, his kids died in horrible ways. It just wrecked his family. So just as for individuals who want to be leaders, this can come at a tremendous price. For Americans being global leaders, this comes at a tremendous price. Is it really worth it? And generally speaking, Americans have tended much more towards isolationism than towards all these foreign entanglements.
I'm just going to add a couple of spotlights.
A global liberal order would only make sense if all the major states of the system were liberal democracies. And short of that, it will always be a partial bounded order where there are gatekeepers and exclusions, and there are sort of entry barriers that I talked about earlier. And part of what that system, that more club-oriented character to Western liberal order did, was it allowed these governments after World War II to create mechanisms through the Bretton Woods system and the trade system to reconcile, if you will, openness with economic stability. This is the Keynesian revolution, developing and putting in the hands of governments capacities to promote full employment and to have openness to the extent it promoted efficiencies and comparative advantage and growth, which is still out there as a logic that we want to keep in the system, but tempering it with if not protectionism, with managed openness that allows governments to overturn commitments to simple openness, as you saw in the 19th century, in the name of.
And Laponius says, look, America may have a strong military, but otherwise everything sucks in America right now. Well, sucks compared to where? Like, where is it better? Where is it more idyllic? Where is it more free? Where is it more prosperous? Where is there more opportunity than the United States? Are things just peachy in Japan or Russia or Saudi Arabia, North Korea, Nigeria, Canada, England, France, Germany? Where is it peachy?
Protecting jobs or providing assistance as certain jobs give way and others emerge. So this kind of activist role of connecting trade and economic.
Okay, let's get a little something from alt-right talk here.
They don't have a personal stake.
Yeah, I saw this post by Mr. Woods in reference
to something Nick has said.
I don't see how they're allies
I thought it was
of Reuters.
why won't this audio shut off? So he's agreeing with Nick. I think these guys argue. It's sort of like more CivNet nationalism versus real nationalism, whatever. Talking about how the anti-China sentiment is misplaced. It's our own governments that are the real problem. There's simply nothing comparable to the threat posed to nationalists by the American regime. I was going to talk about this, but let's just watch the video.
When China is rising, it is rising naturally at the expense of that American regime, which is directly involved. I mean, they're directly involved in making our lives worse off. And you can say, like, oh, well, China, you think China doesn't hurt you? No, it actually doesn't. China didn't get me banned from PayPal. China didn't get me banned from Stripe. China didn't get me banned from Facebook and Instagram. All those are American companies, and I was banned by them.
Why would China or Russia or opponents of the Western democracies, why would they want to ban people that are sowing discord in the countries that are their adversaries? I mean, they're kind of useful idiots, so why would they ban them? That's what they don't get with this analysis.
Because American journalists, probably indirectly funded by the American government, tattled on me to them. And those are American monopolies. And China had nothing to do with it. You know, every bad thing that's happened in my life, every detriment to my rightful and legitimate rights and political expression and success has come from the American regime, the American oligarchy. And if the American oligarchy is being pushed out of the Pacific, that's a good thing. Amazon bans Parler from web hosting. Tencent is comparable to Amazon. If Tencent has market dominance, and they, unlike Amazon, are not personally involved in the deplatforming of right-wing people, it's a good thing when Tencent has more market share. It's a good thing when Alibaba has more market share. Because Alibaba and Tencent are not personally, they don't have a personal stake in destroying me for having right-wing beliefs like Amazon does.
Exactly. Why would a Chinese company care that, you know, you or Keith Woods or Mike Enoch or Eric Stryker is sowing discord in the United States or promoting basically the overthrow of the U.S. regime? It doesn't affect them. They're either neutral or you're a useful idiot to them. But they never talk about this.
I don't see how they're allies of Reuters. Was that what I'm saying? Am I saying China's our best friend, or I'm saying that China does not have a personal stake in fucking over people that are called racist by the Jews, by the ADL and the SPLC? And maybe it's a good thing that people that are at best indifferent to us, or maybe even just potentially hostile, is better than people that are outright hostile, you know, blood coming out of their eyes with lust to kill us.
Again, China and Russia or Iran, they want to see a weakened U.S., so they have the ability to spread their tentacles into that void, into that vacuum. So why would they be against people like Fuentes that sow discord, or QAnon, or they're actually actively promoting some of these movements, the Russians, through their disinformation? So you're saying that our enemies are backing you. You're getting the cause and effect reversed here. You're saying the U.S. is your enemy, the U.S. regime and their allies are their enemy because they're trying to suppress you. But it's you that's basically undermining the legitimacy of the U.S. regime and sowing discord. So that's why people turn against you, or Enoch or Stryker, or these other people. You got the causality reversed, but they just...
Yeah, so Nick Fuentes was telling Republicans not to vote in Georgia, so he did everything he could to hand control of the United States Senate to the Democrats. Now, I had further thoughts on Laponius's comment that everything sucks in America right now, but it's military power. So I think a lot of this has to do, I mean, this is widespread thinking on the border, right? And I'm on the border. This is a dissident stream. This stream is largely focused on dissident right politics. What does that mean? Right-wing politics means that you are A-OK with hierarchy, that you understand that different peoples have different gifts. So to be on the left means you're putting a priority on equality. So to be on the right also means that, generally speaking, when it comes to human and social arrangements, the traditional ways, time-tested ways, are better than untested, innovative ways. So as for this widespread thinking that everything sucks in America right now, I think a lot of it has to do with what channel are you tuned to, not Fox News or CNN, though watching cable news will, pollute your mind. And it's not just about what live stream channels are you tuned into, but what channel in your mind? Are you tuned to the channel of love and gratitude, right? I mean, what's going on in your mind? Like, are you thinking about, everything that's wonderful in the world around you? Or are you thinking a great deal about everything that sucks in the world around you, right? So we get to choose what we tune into. So I've been reading the novel A Dance to the Music of Time, the first one. And there's this Uncle Giles character who's about 50 years of age, and he is an outlier. He lives on the border. Nobody has any expectations for Uncle Giles, so everything he does is kind of looked at as some kind of practical joke. So Uncle Giles could go out and do anything, and it would not shock or disappoint or disillusion anyone because people don't expect anything from Uncle Giles. And so in many ways, I'm Uncle Giles in my Los Angeles Orthodox Jewish community. Like, people have no expectations for me. So in my Los Angeles Orthodox Jewish community, I'm a marginalized loser. Now, I could focus on I'm a loser, I'm a creep, I'm a marginalized loser. Or I could welcome, hey, what are the opportunities with that? The opportunities are I cannot disappoint anyone, all right, in my Orthodox Jewish community, because people have no expectations for me. So I have tremendous freedom to come on here and say almost anything I want to say. I get to explore almost all the ideas that I want to explore. I get to tell almost all the jokes that I want to tell. I get to share almost all the stories that I want to share from my life. I have tremendous freedom by being a marginalized loser in my Orthodox Jewish community. So we get to choose what we focus on. Like, 2 men looked out from prison bars. You know, one saw mud and the other saw stars. So you can look at the stars. Like, the sunsets and the sunrises have just been spectacular here in Los Angeles last few weeks. Just amazing sunsets, sunrise. Streets are clean where I walk. Not too many homeless. Relatively little crime. I could focus on what I don't have. Like, I'm a 54-year-old bachelor. Like, I could get all mopey that I'm not married, that I don't have kids, but I don't choose to tune into that channel. I choose to tune into the channel of where I'm grateful, where I have freedom to say virtually everything that I want to say, where I have freedom to explore all the books that I want to explore. I have freedom to delve into all the ideas that I want to understand. I have freedom to write blog posts and to make live streams and to write books and to interview people from all over the world. I love all the spare time that I have. I've created a life where I have a tremendous amount of time. During the pandemic, I've been reading probably about a book every other day. For a while there, I was hitting a book a day. That slowed down to maybe a book every other day. So I simply don't spend time thinking about what I don't have. So I'm on here almost every day. And how often do you see me mopey? How often do you see me depressed? How often do you see me vengeful? How often do you see me defeated and beaten and just, knocked down and destroyed by life? How often, am I on here, whining about how, these people have screwed me over and Google has screwed me over and like YouTube, oy vey, what they did to me, and someone mistreated me here. No, I come on here 95% of the time. I'm ridiculously happy because I choose what I focus on in my brain. I focus on the love channel. I focus on the gratitude channel. I focus on things that are healthy and exciting. So most exciting things are going to be bad for me, but the pursuit of knowledge is, for example, an excitement that's good for me. So I think about my friends. I think about meeting up with my friends, going for walks with my friends, FaceTiming with my friends, emailing with my friends, getting together with my friends, bouncing ideas off my friends. I think about my community, how I can contribute. I think about 12-step programs and how I can volunteer, be of service, and where I can go for inspiration when I have questions, who I can look to, people I respect, who I can bounce ideas off or ask them questions. I have a very full life. So this pandemic came along and so one part of my life had to fall away, but that simply opened up space and time for all these other pursuits. I got to spend more time reading. I spent more time talking to sponsees on the phone. I get to spend more time writing in my journal. I get to spend more time live streaming. So life will hit you with unexpected developments and it will take away some things. But when life takes away some things, it opens up other things. So I know someone who works 7 days a week and he's done very well in his business, but he's looking at retirement. So he could make a list of all the things that he wants to do when he's retired. Or he could just retire and then go, oh, what do I do now? Right? But it opens up all these possibilities. So we can think, oh, Joe Biden's in office and he's pushing this policy I don't like. And you can focus on some dumb gay policy that the Biden administration is pushing, or you can focus on what is strong and hetero. You can focus on what is classical and what is beautiful, what is meaningful, what is transcendent, what is godly. So largely depends on where do you want to put your focus.
Economic development to a full-service modern government dedicated to making sure that technology and monetary policy and industrial policy all serve the interests of the middle class. Because I agree with John, the Western society, starting with the United States, really have taken a hit, and that will never, we will never be able to recreate a functioning international order that I would call liberal-oriented, a Western liberal order, until we connect that internationalism to these sorts of domestic programs.
Okay. John, did you want to respond to that?
No, I think it's better that the students get to ask.
Okay. So here's a good question from one of my students, Zach Vandel, which is how would a future politician restart the anti-liberal international order position for the United States without being immediately delegitimized by our country's elites, much like Donald Trump was from 2016 to now?
You want me to say a few words about that?
Sure.
I think that Donald Trump was a very special case. Donald Trump was somebody who was, for better or for worse, a polarizing figure. And I think that he's now behind us. And I think with what you're going to see with the Biden administration is what really matters. And with regard to the Biden administration, I believe the Biden administration will talk like the liberal international order is still alive and well. But what they will actually do is move forward, much the way Donald Trump moved forward, to help create a bounded American-led order to deal with the Chinese bounded order that is now emerging. What I'm saying to you, and I'm saying in response to Zach's question, is I think that although there will be a great emphasis on difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden at the rhetorical level, in fact, Trump has set the train in motion, right, to move away from the liberal international order and to create a bounded order that may have many liberal features and therefore make John happy, but nevertheless, it will be a bounded order. So I don't think there will be that much difference in practice between what President Biden does and what President Trump formally did. Although I think rhetorically, there will be a huge difference.
Right, right. Okay, here's another question. And basically it involves your assessment of the ramifications of each of your arguments for the future of the...
Okay, there's a comment in the chat. Look, I hope you're not comparing yourself to your brother because your brother seems really cool. Well, a lot of people think that, oh, the spiritual way is that we stop comparing ourselves. That's not possible. Impossible to stop comparing. Now, you can compare and despair, but comparison doesn't have to lead you to despair, even if your older brother is just so cool. We want to embrace reality, and reality means that we will compare, and we need to compare ourselves with other people for information, see how they're dealing with the challenges of life, all right, and to kind of measure where we are with the skills and abilities and resources that we have, and maybe we can learn from the approaches of other people. For example, all my friends, pretty much all my peers, are married with kids and have mortgages and make more money and have more prestige than I do. So what can I learn from them about the choices they've made? Then we need to compare for connection. We all need to find our tribe, right? It's absolutely vital to have a tribe. A group strategy will almost always outcompete an individualist strategy. And we need to be around other people, right? We need people and we need inspiration. So you can compare and despair, or you can compare and get inspired. So when you see people who are excelling you, you can use that to get excited, to get inspired, rather than to, get down. So there's a really funny interchange here with John Mearsheimer and this liberal professor. So check this out.
Security cooperation with its allies in Europe and Asia, and it becomes all the more important as China rises, and until it emerges into a new shape and perhaps moves in our direction, it is going to be a security rival, and the alliances are going to matter in that competition.
I think with regard to the future of the US military, we are going to have our hands full trying to contain China. This is a country that now has 4 times as many people as the United States. If it had a per capita GNP that looked like South Korea, it would be twice as wealthy as the United States. Just think about that. At the height of the Cold War, right, the Soviet Union had roughly the same size population as the United States, and at most, it had 1/3 the wealth of the United States. And here we're talking about a country right? That in the year 2050 is supposed to have 3.7 times as many people as us, 3.7 times as many people, and will probably be about 2 times, maybe even more wealthy than the United States. And we're taking them on 6,000 miles from the California coast. We are going to have our hands full. And this is going to be the principal military mission of the United States moving forward. And again, you want to remember that the liberal international order and liberal hegemony, which is the American foreign policy that we've pursued since the Cold War ended, right? And it was pursued by both Democrats and Republicans alike, helped create this behemoth that we now have to deal with, and you're going to have to deal with. Now, let me say a little bit about force structure. Look, during the Cold War, the Soviet threat was centered on Europe. It was the Central Front. And the forces that mattered the most for dealing with the Soviet threat were ground forces, i.e. the Army, and air forces. The Navy did not matter much. It mattered, but it did not matter much during the Cold War. We're in a fundamentally different world now, as you surely know. If you look at the geography of Asia, it's quite clear that the Army doesn't matter very much, and that the Air Force and the Navy matter one whole heck of a lot. So I think all of you are going to have a lot to think about vis-a-vis the China threat. It's going to be the main concern you're going to face when thinking about grand strategy, operational strategy, and tactics moving forward. And I am sad to say, but I think one whole heck of a lot of money is going to be spent on the Navy and the Air Force. And I think that there is a real possibility that we will get into a shooting war at some point with China. I hope that doesn't happen, but I think it is possible. And it makes me very nervous. And again, I just can't believe that we helped create this behemoth.
Can I just ask John, it's a kind of counterfactual in the 1990s. First of all, China was already in the international order. It wasn't simply on the outside wanting to get in. It was of.
So I just banned Dionysus from the chat room. So criticism makes us better. Criticism makes us stronger. Criticism makes us more effective, but there's no reason that you need to accept abuse. So when criticism tips over into abuse, then why put up with it?
Permanent member of the UN Security Council, in most major international institutions, we did make bets that turned out, as I said, to be wrong. But the counterfactual always puzzles me. The idea of a American grand strategy in the 21st century tied to a multi-generational effort to keep 1.2 billion people poor and unhappy. How do you do that? In what sense could we have?
Okay, so he's asking, like, in what sense could we have held back China? Well, simply abstain from assisting them. So it's not really such a complicated question. Like, why did we have to bring China into the WTO? Why did we have to extend, such vast amounts of help and assistance to China and their rise? Right? Simply abstain from helping them. It's not so complicated. Princeton University professor G. John Ikenberry, author of A World Safe for Democracy, Liberal Internationalism, and the Crises of Global Order. Not so complicated. Simply abstain from helping your enemy.
Had a different policy that would have been sustainable in an American democracy with values and institutions and traditions and a history of what we know about the world we live in, how would we have contained or put the thumb on such a large, proud country in a way that would have made our lives today better off? I would see a very angry China with nuclear weapons and all the instruments of power.
Oh, angry. They'd be angry because we didn't help them. Yeah, well, so what? Right? Beautiful women. I mean, they have lots of men who want to go out with them, but they turn them down. All right? So those guys going to be, angry incels? That's not the ladies' problem. It's not America's problem. What emotional states the Chinese are in.
But poor, unhappy, outside of some kind of.
Oh my God, we got 1 billion unhappy Chinese. Wow, that's really pressing American foreign policy problem. We've got poor, unhappy Chinese. Gosh.
System that the U.S. was enforcing on China. What kind of world would that have been? I don't know anybody who credibly argued that, including realists at the time, who, by the way, were more worried about Germany and Japan as rivals to the United States at the very end of the Cold War. So what is the 40-year grand strategy that could keep China poor, unhappy?
And the chat says incels might rise up. Well, they might do antisocial things. They might commit some crimes, but they can never rise up as a group because almost by definition of being an incel, you've got strong antisocial tendencies. People who get along with other people aren't incels. So incels will never be a cohesive movement. They may well commit individual crimes, and they may well get filled with nihilistic rage, but they will never constitute a cohesive movement.
And outside of our world.
Let me make a couple points. First of all, there's no way we could have done it simply because public opinion in the United States was firmly opposed to doing it, because public opinion was firmly on your side and elite opinion was on your side. When you said before that we made a bet that China could rise peacefully, that bet was supported by almost everybody in the national security or foreign policy establishment, you included. So I don't think it was feasible given where the American foreign policy elite was at the time. I want to be very clear. If you read my Tragedy of Great Power Politics, which came out in 2001, I said that the United States should go to great lengths to try to slow down, if not reverse, Chinese growth. So there was at least one person on the planet who was making that argument. But I was a lone voice in the wilderness because you and your buddies dominated the discourse. The problem is that you bet wrong, and we now are facing Godzilla. Now, your question is, could we have done anything to slow down China? Yes, we could have done a lot of things to slow down China. One is not let them in the WTO. This was a huge mistake. And all sorts of liberal elites, you included, supported bringing China into the WTO because you thought it was going to become a responsible stakeholder. Well, you were wrong. And bringing them into the WTO made them much more powerful and, in my opinion, much more dangerous. Now, would it ultimately have worked, even if we could have slowed them down in the short term by denying them membership in the WTO and doing other things? Would it have worked in the long term? I don't know. It might not have worked. That's the thrust of your argument. You might be right. I can't tell. But I find it amazing that we didn't at least think about trying to slow down China's growth and then trying to do what we could to stop it. If you look at Britain before World War I, the British saw Germany rising and they thought long and hard about how to stop Germany's rise. They ultimately decided they couldn't stop it, but they at least thought about it. We didn't even think about it, except for a handful of people like me. Everybody else.
I would just say that this is an important debate, and I hope that our midshipmen know that we're going to be thinking about this for a long time. I would just want to keep one thing in mind, and that is that we didn't have in looking at the post-Cold War.
So the people who've been massively wrong about American foreign policy, they generally speaking, they haven't paid a price. So there are spheres in life where if you're wrong, you pay a price. Then there are other spheres in life where you don't pay a price. And pundits and people who supported the disastrous wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, they haven't paid much of a price. Okay. Here are the pundits who supported invading Iraq. You have Charles Krauthammer, Jenna Goldberg, Rich Lowry, Fred Kagan, Robert Kagan, Victor Davis Hanson, John Podhoretz, William Crystal, David Brooks, Thomas Friedman, Peter Barnett, Jeffrey Goldberg, Fareed Zakaria. Right? They all prospered. They were ridiculously, obscenely, horrifically wrong about invading Iraq and Afghanistan and occupying those countries. Okay. What about the pundits who were opposed to these invasions? William Lind, Robert Scheer, Jonathan Schell, Scott Ritter. They didn't have any rewards. All right. So success in punditry and success in live streaming has absolutely nothing to do with being right. All right. What it has to do with how successful are you at feeding an audience what it wants to hear? That's what it comes down to. So are you a good prostitute? Do you slob the knob of your audience? Do you whisper sweet nothings in the ear of your audience? When I went to bed with porn stars, they all told me what a fantastic cock I had. No non-porn star has ever told me that. They were like, oh, this is amazing. This is fantastic. You know, it's just the perfect size. You know, just love, you know, having sex with you and fuck me like a whore. And, you know, 40, you're the best. All right. You know, regular women didn't talk that way. All right, they told me what I wanted to hear. You know, I got rock hard. You know, I was a rock star in the bedroom. You know, they inspired me to, you know, great erotic heights because they told me what I wanted to hear. But I'm not sure they would have made for good wives and mothers. So frequently the way of the wicked is that the wicked will be immensely popular. The wicked will be immensely prosperous. The wicked may well dominate the high grounds of culture.
Or approach to China, there never was a singular grand strategic statement. There was a consensus that kind of emerged, both Republicans and Democrats, about China and how to think about China, and it really had two components. One is what we've been talking about. At the time, it was called engagement. That we would be interacting with them and trying to elicit behaviors. They were still, this is Deng Xiaoping, there was a real sense of openness. There was not a sense that they would become a liberal democracy, but the term that was used most often, I think in the Clinton administration, there would be kind of economic freedom that would be planted or encouraged inside of China, and that would be better than the alternative, and it might lead to more more pluralism and contestation and move in our direction. But the others, that was one feature, engagement of China. The other feature of American implicit multi-administration grand strategy towards China was securing the balance of power, that we would not just maintain, but we would strengthen our alliances when the Cold War was over. And there was a real question, should we even keep these alliances?
So is this guy remotely embarrassed about how obscenely wrong he's been, how disastrously wrong he's been? You'd think like an honorable person who's been as wrong as John Ikenberry would quit and become an insurance adjuster. He is not the least bit embarrassed. He doesn't care that he was incredibly, totally, badly, obscenely, tremendously wrong. No shame. None. Zip, zero, zilch.
There was a real effort to define them and lead.
And he still wants to be a pundit. He still wants to tell us what to do, even though he's got this long, horrific, horrifying, disgusting, terrible, obscene track record. It has not dimmed his enthusiasm for telling us right and wrong and what policies we should pursue.
Legitimate them as stabilizing forces to discourage a rising China to use its power for military purposes. So there's always been a kind of, as there was during the Cold War, a kind of a double strategy. Part of it is traced to kind of realist insights. Part of it might be traced to liberal insights, engagement, but balance and counterbalance and shoring up.
See, he wants to blame the war, the invasion of Iraq on realists. See, he's doing everything he can to contort it so it's like really realists who are behind it. But none of the major realist thinkers in the academy supported the invasion of Iraq in 2003. None of the realists supported the invasion of Iran, of Vietnam in the 1960s. Like realists oppose, these stupid forever wars. But he's trying to, play word games, dish out the word salad to try to, put the blame on the realists for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And he has no shame about his horrible, horrible track record.
Up and make sure that it's not just America versus China, but it's the allies, Japan most importantly, but also South Korea and all the other bilateral alliance ties that connect the United States to East Asia and increasingly to India. So I've always thought it wasn't simply a kind of naive bet that we'll let them trade with us and capitalism will kind of the lapping tides of capitalism will erode authoritarian structures. That was clearly something that some of us hoped.
Like, notice how incredibly wordy he is compared to Mearsheimer. Like, Mearsheimer speaks about 1/4 as much, but this guy just goes on and on and on with his nonsense.
For, but there was always this much more realist insight about maintaining a balance, and I think that's always been there as a kind of double strategy along with engagement.
Ed, can I have 1 minute on this?
Sure.
John, this was a naive bet, right? You say that we were interested, that we had a vested interest in maintaining the balance of power in Asia. And of course, that's true because we were by far the dominant power in Asia, and we wanted to keep it that way. But if you pursue a policy that helps China grow its economy and turns it into an economic superpower, you are going to upset the balance of power by definition. How could it be otherwise? Did you seriously think that when you turn this country into an economic superpower, that it wouldn't translate that economic might into military might? The United States, as you surely have noticed, is a liberal democracy, and it's very rich, and it builds incredibly powerful military forces. Why wouldn't China, as it became a liberal democracy and a rich liberal democracy at that, build powerful military forces, which of course it's done. And the end result is it's upset the balance of power. And we're now at a point where it may be the case that over time, China is by far the most powerful country in Asia, not the United States. This is not in our interest. And we inadvertently caused this situation. And it was because people like you, and not only you by any means, I'm saying you're just reflective of the foreign policy establishment in general, had this idea that by growing China economically, integrating it into institutions and so forth and so on, it would turn into a responsible stakeholder. It was, in your terminology, a bet, and we lost. And I'd say the consequences are really disturbing.
But the theory is that even though they would become more powerful.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful tirade there by John Mearsheimer. So we've got
themselves and put it.
E. Michael Jones here. Let me play some from E. Michael Jones, False Flag Weekly Barrett, and of course BitChute is not really working. Gosh, I hate BitChute. It's just horrible platform. The technology of BitChute is just the worst. All right, back to Michael Beckley writing in foreignaffairs.com, Foreign Affairs magazine, about America will become the rogue superpower in an increasingly illiberal 21st century. When the Cold War ended, Americans did not see the point of U.S. global leadership. They became ever more wary of overseas entanglements, and yet their wishes were not heeded by the elites who control our foreign policy establishment. U.S. presidents often took office pledging to do less abroad, more at home. So George W. Bush wanted to have a more humble foreign policy. Despite such promises, the post-Cold War era saw Washington launch numerous military interventions in the Balkans, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya, witnessed the further expansion of the U.S.-led liberal order. China joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization. The European Union solidified. NATO expanded. The global economy relied ever more on American institutions. And I'm trying to play a little excerpt here from E. Michael Jones, but BitChute won't allow me.
Wob, and you can
You can use it as intended. Okay. So how about the Wuhan is back to normal, except for the anal swab. Actually, the anal swabs are in Beijing. Wuhan is back to normal, or maybe anal swabs are normal now. It's the new normal. I don't know what's going on here. Oh boy. Okay. So Wuhan's back to normal. The Western media is going crazy. And the Western media is telling us that they only got back to normal thanks to harsh measures like anal swabs, which, of course, we're now going to have to imply here. Are you ready?
No.
Good.
No. It's not going to happen. China is not the United States. I know a lot of people wish it were, but the United States is not China. There are differences. And what plays there is not necessarily going to play here. And if they think
Indeed.
it is, they're in for a surprise.
Two very different systems, two different countries. Well, now the U.S., which is the dominant #1 power, is probing deep into the bowels of the South China Sea, trying to start something with China, the rising #2 power. And the controlled corporate media tells us that Biden and all of his people, including Blinken, are saying that, hey, Trump was totally right about trying to stoke up tensions with China. We're going to do that too. I find that less than reassuring. How about you?
The main problem with the military is overextension, which comes about when you're trying to rule the world. Okay, you're always going to be overextended. And this, in my humble opinion, is misdirection. Why is the British Navy Leviathan? It's the sea monster. It controls the sea lanes and can blockade ports if they get uppity. Okay, they can't do that. During the last 4 years, the Chinese have extended their railroad, the One Belt, One Road, connecting Shanghai and Rotterdam, and that makes the U.S. Navy obsolete. So this is misdirection here.
Okay, well, maybe it is, but we're seeing this rise of tension between the U.S. and China and Russia, which we'll get to in a moment. And in the midst of this moment of increasing tension, Foreign Affairs magazine, the CFR's leading journal, published a piece by Stephen Wertheim, essentially dishing out what strikes me as very sensible foreign policy advice. So this is our man bites dog story. Foreign Affairs actually published a sensible article pointing out that basically the U.S. era of dominance is over. Let's get used to it.
Well, foreign affairs was always more attuned to the WASP, the old WASP establishment in terms of foreign policy, and they were an anti-neocon operation. And this is out of this milieu came Walt and Mearsheimer. So they were ignored when they wrote that book on the Israel lobby. But now what we're seeing here is this total fixation on Israel's interests has led to the decline of the United States as a world power, and they're just admitting it, the reality of the situation.
Well, that's true. So the U.S. can't rule the world, but some of these neocons still act like they're trying to. Let's move to the war on Russia news. The Navalny protests are breaking out, about to color revolution Russia. Bye-bye Putin. Well, that's what the mainstream media seems to hope. But if we read the other side of the story, move on from the New York Times over to UNS.com, where we can read about the Saker's view. The Saker is a Russian military analyst who currently lives in Florida, rather than this massive revolution that we heard about in the New York Times with the protesters pelting the police with snowballs and kicking at a car belonging to the domestic intelligence agency. Thousands of protesters, they tell us. Well, the Saker tells us that, in fact, this is all nonsense. It's another American failed color revolution. It's not going to hurt Putin, whose popularity is still up in the 60% plus levels. It's been as high as close to 80, but it's still high enough that there's not going to be any color revolution in Russia.
Yeah, Israel Shamir said the same thing. He's a Russian, lives part-time in Israel, part-time in Sweden. And he said that the protest was nothing. It was nothing like the way it was being portrayed. And it's not going to threaten Putin. Putin, by the way, just gave a speech in which he talked about how powerful big tech has become and how they're more powerful than government. Has anyone else in the world, any other world leader, been that perceptive, addressed that issue?
Indeed.
So Vladimir Putin has been the most effective major power leader in 40 years. He took over Russia, which was just an absolute mess, and brought it back to close to superpower status. All right, back to Foreign Affairs magazine, which E. Michael Jones was just discussing. Michael Beckley writes, Germany, and they were shocked by Trump's election on an America First platform. And they wanted to blame America's nationalist posture on Trump alone. But American support for the post-war liberal order has been shaky. So just as Americans, by and large, don't care about Israel, they don't care about any country but America. And Australians don't really care about any country but America, and the English don't really care much about any country but England. So more than 60% of Americans want the United States simply to look after itself. And pollsters ask Americans, what should America's priorities be? Very few people cite spreading democracy, free trade, human rights, right? These core elements of the liberal international order. Americans don't care for them. What Americans are concerned about include preventing terrorist attacks, protecting American jobs, reducing illegal immigration. So more than half of Americans oppose sending U.S. troops to defend allies under attack. 80% of Americans favor the use of tariffs to prevent job losses from trade. So Trump's approach is a winning approach. The problem is his personality was just so childish that it cost him any possibility of increasing his base and getting reelected. So Trump's America First approach is not an aberration. It is the current that has long run through American political culture. In the years ahead, American support for the liberal order already, it's very small, will probably decline further because of demographic and technological changes. It will increase the U.S. economic and military lead and make America less dependent on others. So almost all the other major countries have populations that are growing dramatically older at extremely fast rates. By 2070, the median age of the world's population will have doubled compared to 100 years earlier, compared to 1970. From 20 to 40 years old, the share of people aged 65 and older in the global population will quadruple from 5% to 19%. For millennia, young people vastly outnumbered old people. In 2018, for the first time ever, there were more people in the world over the age of 64 than under the age of 6. The United States will be the only major country with a large growing market. Among the world's 20 largest economies, only Australia, Canada, and the United States will have growing populations of adults aged 20 to 49 throughout the next 50 years. The other large economies, such as Japan, Germany, China, Russia, will suffer on average a 16% decline in that critical age group. That's the age group that gets most of the work done and pays most of the taxes. Most of the demographic decline will be concentrated among the world's most powerful economies outside the United States. China will lose 225 million young workers and consumers aged 20 to 49. That's 36% of its current total workforce. So China's set to lose 225 million out of its workforce. Japan's population of 20 to 49-year-olds will shrink by 42%. Russia's by 23%. Germany's by 17%. India's population, 20 to 49, will grow until 2040, but then it will decline rapidly. Meanwhile, the American population of workers 20 to 49 will expand by 10% over the next 50 years. So the American financial market economy is already as large as that of the next 5 countries combined. The United States depends less on foreign trade and investment than almost any other country. So a lot of people talk about, hey, what will happen if China stops buying our T-bills? We got to be nice to China. The American economy will crash if China stops buying our bonds. No, it won't crash. It won't matter. China doesn't buy our bonds out of kindness, right? They buy our bonds because the American economy is the most solid thing in the world. As other major economies shrivel, the United States will become even more central to global growth. America will be less reliant on international commerce. The United States will have less need for allies. Rapid aging will hobble the military expansion of America's great power adversaries. By 2050, Russia's spending on pensions and medical care for the elderly will increase by 50% as a share of its GDP. China's spending on pensions and medical care for the elderly will triple. United States, such spending will increase by only 35%. You think America's got debt problems? China has astronomically more debt problems, about triple the size of America's, the national American government debt problem. Russia and China will soon face severe choices between buying guns for their militaries, buying canes for their ballooning elderly population, and they may well have to prioritize taking care of their old folks to prevent domestic unrest. So America has no threats on its borders. We just got Mexico and Canada. No one loses any sleep about Mexico and Canada. China is surrounded by 18 states that hate China. So China has to spend huge amounts of resources just dealing with its 18 neighbors who absolutely hate its guts. Russia also has neighbors who hate its guts. So they have to spend vastly more resources just looking after themselves. America has no such problem. Therefore, America is free to roam wherever they want in the world. If Russia and China don't cut their military spending, they'll still struggle to modernize their militaries because of the rapid aging of the troops. Personnel costs consume 50% of Russia's military budget, compared with 25% of the US military budget. And as these military personnel retire, then Russia's share for personnel costs for retirement pensions will vastly exceed 50% this decade. China's personnel costs are officially listed at 31%, but independent estimates suggest that just these personnel costs consume half of China's defense spending, will only rise in the years ahead. So rapid aging around the world will accelerate America's economic and military lead over its great power rivals and will take place alongside a similarly advantageous trend, the growth of automation. So you're probably wondering, what the heck does no white guilt have to say? What perspectives does no white guilt offer us?
Cool. But we both have seen, and I would like to hear if you have any comments on that, but we both have seen these incidents now in both of our countries where there are patriots or nationalists or conservatives, whatever they call themselves. They don't understand the world for the way it really is. And they think, well, by golly, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to say no to this. And then we see that they're being run over by cars, and we see that the miscreants, the anti-white malefactors, the destroyers, are ganging up on them and caving in their skulls, bludgeoning them until the point that they are vegetables. And they would never be able to function properly in the world again. And we see also the police ganging up on them. I saw it was very poignant and in my heart was ripped out of my chest when I saw these English veterans heading down to protect a statue that they thought, my country, this is a part of my country, it's a part of my heritage. I went to war for this. I was under enemy fire for this. I obeyed orders and charged into dangerous situations for this. I'm going to go protect it. And for weeks they had seen the police in the United States, in the UK and elsewhere, taking a knee, lying down on their faces to these destroyers who are attacking the police, murdering the police, destroying civilization. And they go out expecting that maybe they're going to get the same treatment because they don't understand the world. And instead, what we saw here in the United States was we saw this UK police that has no problem putting flowers on, putting pink on, dancing like they are tribal members in the middle of other continents, and appeasing every way they can, getting on their knees, bowing their heads, begging for forgiveness to these anti-white mobs that want nothing less than to absolutely white erase all of our people from the UK. And then these older veterans get out there, and these feckless wimps of law enforcement suddenly show up with shields and batons and bear mace and threats and marching them into areas where they say, well, we've marched you here. Right. So you have to know how the game is being called. You have to know whether they're going to call holding. You have to know what laws are going to be enforced. You have to know what groups are going to have laws enforced against them and which groups are going to not be enforced against. Right? Reality is not just what's written on law codes. Right? You have to get into reality. Here now, if you stay, you're going to be charged with terrorism and you're going to get 20 years in prison. Talk to us about that and anything else that I just had to say prior to that.
Well, I mean, I must admit, this is the kind of thing I used to find deeply insulting and irritating. But I will say that now I feel really, actually, this is starting to become quite frightening. And I don't say this to put fear in people, but this sort of behavior, these waves of violence and routine, what feels like routine now, blanket dehumanization, is actually classed as one of the early stages of genocide. As you say, iconoclasm, the tearing down of culture.
So optics matter, and what other people do who use your rhetoric matter. So when people who use your rhetoric go out and shoot 70 people in a mosque or shoot up a Walmart, then law enforcement is going to take a much tougher line on people who use your rhetoric. That's why you have to understand some of the nuances of reality. And for people on the distant right, public demonstrations are not likely to be treated kindly by law enforcement, nor by the media, nor by regular folks.
Cultural symbols. I guess what in Cambodia they used to call, under Pol Pot, the Khmer Rouge, trying to create a year zero. I mean, Sadiq Khan actually had said that he wanted to diversify London's statues, now that they've diversified the population, of course, to better reflect. He said that Victorian era doesn't represent our values anymore. I mean, it's just this is the kind of thing you read about in Stalinist Russia. But in a way, because we live in a first world country, it's.
So you don't get to fight on the battleground of your choosing always. Sometimes you have to fight on a battleground of your enemy's choosing, and sometimes it's best to run rather than to fight. Right? A lot of people say, "Oh, you got to stand up. You got to be brave. You got to speak truth to power. You got to hit the streets. You got to, let people know what's what." Well, sometimes the best thing you can do is go to yoga class and read a book and go to work and do your job and look after your family.
It's too remarkable almost to really believe it's happening, and the rate and the scale at which it's accelerated is also deeply concerning. But I mean, just watching some of the clips that were coming out of America, just gangs of people flooding into shops, and I don't mean this to sound excessive, but it really reminded me of what we learned about in history was what did they call it? The Night of the Broken Glass, I guess they called it. Well, you see this footage of these poor white people just quietly sweeping up the glass of their shops, and it's amazing to me how quickly as well that seems to have been forgotten. That was only a few weeks ago. I read something like 140 cities were burning. I mean, it looked like a war zone from Baghdad, some of this footage, and we're just sort of quiet.
Yeah, and it did absolutely look horrible, and it felt horrible if you were nearby, felt horrible if you were watching it. What's amazing, though, is how relatively few people were murdered by this. So in the LA riots back in 1992, we had at least 55 people got murdered. And so I'm not a fan, obviously, of Black Lives Matter nor Antifa. What's surprising is the relatively low number of murders that accompany these protests. So on the one hand, it's easy to point out all the things that law enforcement did wrong, but they did limit at least the murder, and how effective they were with limiting property damage. They were pretty effective in Los Angeles. Other cities had a much tougher time.
Quietly expected to sweep it up, but I don't. I mean, this comparing as well. It's this. I tend to think as soon as you start referring to a racial group as a venereal disease, that's when you need to start worrying. And we are referred to as a some sort of white supremacy is this latent paranoia of both the press and non-European communities who are absolutely fixated on us as being this kind of pernicious force that needs to be. I remember when AOC referred to it as a virus that needs to be inoculated against. Well, isn't that what we learn at school? That talking about people as though they were vermin and parasites, isn't that what we're told is the kind of dehumanizing language that leads to genocide? And yet this is really routinely done to us. It's quite frightening, and I really think we have to be quite aggressive now in not violent, of course, but in really kind of trying to nip this in the bud, because I also saw footage of these militant.
Have to be quite aggressive to nip this thing in the bud. And you and what army are going to nip it in the bud, right? You have to be in reality. Like, how much can you control? You're not going to have to nip it in the bud. All the things you're talking about are completely out of the power of you and people who think like you to control right now. So I wish it wasn't this way. I wish reality wasn't shaped as it is, but you don't have the option. You don't have the power. You don't have the capability. You don't have the resources to nip it in the bud. Having delusions about how much power, resources, and influence you can bring to bear on these questions does not serve you.
groups out with guns calling. There was also that couple as well that reminded me of a scene in The Farm in South Africa. You saw them with a big mansion. I mean, I don't know, maybe they're the type that propagate mass immigration and diversity. I don't know what their politics are. But when you saw them tearing down their iron gate, that was quite frightening actually to watch. And it does look like these farm murders in South Africa, doesn't it? It makes you realize how not even the rich really will be safe from this. I mean, there's so much I could go into. I don't even know really where to take this. But I mean, there was that beautiful elk statue as well I saw was on fire in Portland. I mean, what on earth? This gorgeous elk, which had from what I understand, no association with slavery, just a totally innocuous, beautiful fountain. Just absolutely disgusting. But what you say about the nooses, I actually hadn't heard. That's very frightening and disturbing, because that to me is a sort of ethnic revenge fantasy, which is what they're enacting. I mean, some of these protesters are holding signs saying, "Oh, Haitian Revolution Part 2." Well, I'm sorry, but I take that as a direct threat of genocide against my people. And I cannot understand how they freaking well get away with it. It disgusts me. I mean, you're carrying a sign that's a reference to massacring. Can you imagine doing? I mean, white people would never even think about doing that about another group because it's a disgusting thing to do.
White people would not think about massacring another group or holding up signs like that. Really?
But I just can't understand. It's quite worrying, and I don't really know how to come back from this. Other than obviously, I don't want to frighten people, but I don't know. What do you think? What do you suggest?
Well, we are doing some amazing things.
Americans do pretty well distancing themselves from those who commit high rates of crime. So it's as though there are certain visual cues about what kind of people are dangerous to hang around, what kind of people are dangerous to riot around, what kind of people are dangerous to party around, what kind of people are just dangerous, and you want to put some distance between you and dangerous people. Overall, Americans do a pretty good job of that. So you want to stay away from dangerous people, and there are often certain cues that let you know whether or not someone's going to be dangerous. For example, I read somewhere that murderers tend to have a disproportionate amount of facial deformations or facial tics and things that are off in their face. So yeah, I feel like I can pretty often get a quick sense of how dangerous someone might be just by looking at them. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if nature just color-coded people for our benefit, that we could just look at someone and go, oh, that bloke looks a little bit dangerous, or, that bloke doesn't look like he can run very fast, or that bloke looks like he's highly intelligent. Wouldn't that be nice if nature just simply color-coded people? Just like you can glance and see which plants are dangerous and which snakes are dangerous and which animals are dangerous. Wouldn't that be nice if nature color-coded people, so we could just have a glance and make rational decisions? Okay, machines becoming exponentially faster, smaller, cheaper. They're developing the ability to adapt to new information. You call it machine learning or artificial intelligence. New machines combine number crunching capabilities of computers, the brute strength of industrial machinery, and some intuition, situational awareness, and dexterity that used to be solely the preserve of human beings. So nearly half of the jobs in today's economy will likely be automated by the 2030s. So the widespread adoption of smart machines will reduce American economic dependence on other countries and reduce America's need, if it does have a need, for cheap foreign labor. The United States enjoys a substantial lead in the industries driving this automation trend. The future is created in Los Angeles, San Francisco Bay Area, New York, more than any other cities. The United States has nearly 5 times as many artificial intelligence companies and experts as China. If you're an AI expert, would you go to China, or would you go to Los Angeles or San Francisco or New York? And China's second place. And China's goods are shoddy. Like, China, generally speaking, manufactures crap. So America's shares of world's artificial intelligence software, hardware markets many times larger than China's. U.S. firms can leverage this technological lead using advanced automation to replace sprawling global supply chains with vertically integrated factories in the United States. So service industries will follow suit as artificial intelligence takes over more tasks. Call centers already moving back to the United States from foreign countries. So for decades, the United States chased cheap labor and resources abroad, but those days are numbered. Automation will allow the United States to rely more on itself. The rise of smart machines will help the United States contain the military rise of its rivals. Instead of waiting for crises to break out, the U.S. will be able to use drones and missile launches in potential conflict zones. These drones and missiles will act as high-tech minefields. They will be capable in and of themselves of annihilating enemy invasion forces. They will be difficult to eliminate, and they are cheap to purchase and produce. The price of one aircraft carrier, the United States can buy 6,500 58A stealth zones or 8,500 loitering cruise missiles. So using these weapons, the United States will be able to capitalize on a fundamental asymmetry in war aims, whereas American rivals such as China and Russia need to seize and control territories such as Taiwan and the Baltics to achieve their goals of regional hegemony. The United States needs only to deny them that control, mission that a network of smart drones and missiles are quite well suited to perform. So aging automation will make the United States increasingly stronger as each year goes by. And the United States, emerging out of COVID, yes, had an enormous death toll, but the death toll has been largely among citizens who aren't working anymore. So there will be a tremendous amount of resources that are spared up because you're no longer taking care of people who are producing. In liberal democracies around the world, public support for the US-led liberal order has rested on rising incomes for the working class, right? It was the working class that voted the Nazis into power. And ever since then, the elites have been very frightened of the working class because the working class, if you give them a choice between democracy and security, they're going to choose security. So rising living standards among the working class have been the result of growing populations and job-creating technologies. The post-war baby boom produced scores of young workers and consumers and assembly lines that provided them with stable jobs. But today, populations across the democratic world are aging and shrinking, and machines are eliminating jobs. So the basic bargain with the working class: work hard, support the liberal system, trust that a rising economic tide will lift all boats. That has broken. Nationalism, xenophobia are filling the void. Over the next 30 years, the working age populations of America's democratic allies will shrink by 12%, making sustained economic growth virtually impossible. The senior populations of these countries will expand by 57% on average. Their average spending on pensions and healthcare will double as a share of GDP. We're talking Japan, China, Russia here. These countries will not be able to borrow their way out of the resulting fiscal mess, because they already carry debts equal to 270% of GDP on average. Before COVID plunged their balance sheets even further into the red. So they'll have to cut entitlements for the elderly. They'll have to slash social spending for the young. They'll have to raise taxes or increase immigration, all of which will produce massive political backlashes. Rapid automation will intensify this economic turmoil. Technological revolutions create prosperity in the long run, but in the shorter run, they force a lot of workers into low-wage jobs or unemployment. While the gains from massive mechanization will go to the tycoons. So around the developing world today, machines are eliminating jobs faster than displaced workers can retrain for new ones. Wages for low and middle skill workers are stagnating. Construction wages in California have stayed stable, unchanged in real terms and in absolute terms since the 1960s because of massive immigration. So sluggish growth, enormous debt, stagnant wages, chronic unemployment, extreme inequality are bound to breed nationalism and extremism. In the 1930s, such frustrations caused many people to reject democracy and international cooperation and to embrace fascism and communism. Ultranationalists are ascendant around the democratic world. In Germany, a right-wing nationalist party, Alternative Germany, now holds the third largest number of seats in the parliament. Cases of neo-Nazi infiltration in the German military and police are multiplying rapidly. The United States' task of leading the liberal world order will grow harder as nationalists gain power, raise tariffs, close borders, and abandon international institutions.
Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. Now, I have such a special guest for you today, and this is a person who, in many ways, when I was a naive young 22 or 23-year-old, sort of introduced me to the theoretical critique of multiculturalism, and I discovered him in the British Library. And that is Paul Gottfried. And so while I sign into the old entropy, I will ask Paul to introduce himself. So, Paul, over to you.
Well, I am an aging retired professor. I am currently the editor-in-chief of Chronicles magazine, which is the only paleo-conservative magazine in the United States that I'm aware of. And I write books in my spare time, and now that I'm retired and I have grown grandchildren by now. And right now I have a work which is in press with Cornell called Anti-Fascism, The Course of a Crusade. As my reading fans might know, I had another book called Fascism, Career of a Concept that came out a few years ago. And that did fairly well, despite the fact that it was not reviewed widely by either the liberal press or the neoconservative or Con Inc., as we call them, Conservatives Incorporated press in the United States. It sold well. It's come out in a number of translations since then. And I've given a number of lectures on it. I am interested in the connection between fascism and anti-fascism. That's something I turned to after finishing a trilogy on the managerial state and multiculturalism. Is there anything else I should be saying?
No, I think that's a reasonable enough summary. But it was very much your book on, as we were saying briefly before the show, opening a Coke, says Blue Sirin. No, anyway, hello everybody, Skull. Cheers. Welcome to the Jolly Heretic. We are of course an online public house, so if you have your beer ready, then that's fine. Of course, if it's America, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's slightly degenerate to drink beer. But well, no, lunchtime beer. But yes, with Paul, I discovered him in the British Library in about 2003. And when I was an undergraduate, there wasn't much of this multiculturalism, and New Labour had only just got into power, and they hadn't brought in all of the sort of dictatorial, totalitarian creep that they gradually brought in Britain between from about 2001 or 2 onwards, slowly. And I became aware of it when I was a postgraduate. Suddenly, there was this gradual awareness of speech codes and censorship and things like this, and it kind of opened my eyes as a postgraduate to what was also the corruption of it, to what was going on. And then I discovered 2 people, which was Paul and a chap called Frank Ellis, who I hope to have on at some point as well, and their critiques of multiculturalism and the idea that it was nascent in my mind, that it seemed so close to sort of totalitarianism, and it seemed so unpleasant, but it wasn't articulated. And so what I liked about that book as a person that studied theology and religion was that you said it was like a theocracy. And I thought that was fascinating. So can you tell us a bit more about how it is that you sort of came to the conclusion that was the best sort of metaphor for it? And
the proxy war allows for transtigation. Influenced by a number of German thinkers and also by some of the work of Eric Voegelin on political religion. And most modern ideologies seem to be the recycling of religious myth. And since Christianity is basic to Western civilization, it seemed to me that multiculturalism could only work within a Christian context. I could not imagine it developing in a Buddhist society or a Hindu society. It would only take root and develop as it did in what had once been a Christian society, and which is still vestigially a Christian society. And what I did in multiculturalism was sort of look at the connection between certain Christian beliefs and the development of multicultural.
Yeah, so there are a lot of books on how Christianity influences the modern secular world. So when people grow up Christian or they come from countries that used to be dominated by Christianity, they don't automatically jettison all the worldviews of Christianity. At the same time, there are also great books on how secularism has steadily influenced both Christianity and Judaism over the past 1,000 years. So there's a book much praised by a bloke I hear from on Twitter, The Theological Origins of Modernity, which the book I think vastly overstates its case. I don't think nominalism has much to do with how the world operates today, but there are even better books on how secularism has been affecting religion. So I'll try to find some of those books that's something I've been reading about. Yes, here we go. Politicizing the Bible, the Roots of Historical Criticism and the Secularization of Scripture from 1300 to 1700. And then, so that's looking at how secularism has affected the Bible, the way the Bible's understood and studied, and affected Christianity. And then in the opposite direction is a thoughtful book, The Theological Origins of Modernity, which I think vastly overstates its case. I had a friend who read that book, and he's convinced that nominalism has just destroyed the modern world and given rise to
nominalism.
leftism. So nominalism is, as opposed to philosophical realism, nominalism is the idea that ideas are mere names without any corresponding reality, and that only particular objects exist, that properties, numbers, and sets are thought of as merely features of the way of considering the things that exist. So nominalism is associated with William of Ockham. It was very important in medieval scholastic thought. I don't think it makes much difference in the world around us today.
Nominalism.
Okay, back to foreign affairs. So America is only going to grow stronger compared to its great power rivals in the years ahead. America is on a course right now to dominate the 21st century much more profoundly even than it dominated the 20th century. So faced with flailing allies and a divided and apathetic public, the United States will start acting less like the head of a grand coalition, much more like a rogue superpower, an economic and military colossus lacking moral commitments, neither isolationist nor internationalist, but aggressive, heavily armed, and entirely out for itself. And under Donald Trump, it's already headed in that direction, and it's going to keep heading in that direction, even with different rhetoric under Joe Biden. So as Thucydides makes the point in his history of the Peloponnesian War, the strong take what they want and the weak endure what they must. During Trump's time in office, many U.S. security guarantees started to look like protection rackets, with the president musing that allies should pay the cost of hosting U.S. troops plus a 50% premium. Well, that is going to be the way America works in the years ahead. Trump administration has enforced trade deals with unilateral tariffs rather than working through the World Trade Organization. We're just going to have more of this in the years ahead. Trump abandoned democracy promotion, downgraded diplomacy. He gutted the State Department. He handed ever more responsibility to the Pentagon. The U.S. military changed. It became a force geared much more for punishment rather than protection. Trump administration downsized permanent U.S. deployments on allied territory, replaced them with roving expeditionary units that can steam overseas, smash targets, then slink back over the horizon. I've been enjoying the CBS TV show SEAL Team. I'm on season 3. Now, Trump's critics decry these changes as not just unwise, but somehow un-American and immoral. But Trump's approach is the one that's most popular. It's the one that appeals to most Americans. It aligns with their preferences regarding America's role in the world. So if these current projections work out, the best case scenario for American leadership may involve Washington adopting a more nationalist version of liberal internationalism, that America may well retain some allies, but make them pay more for protection, may well sign some trade agreements, but only with countries that adopt U.S. regulatory standards. America may participate in international institutions, but threaten to leave them when they act against American interests. America may promote democracy and human rights, but mainly to destabilize geopolitical rivals. So America wants to promote democracy and human rights in China and Russia and other authoritarian countries. Now, the rhetoric is beautiful, but what happens on the ground? You can very well destabilize authoritarian regimes with these beautiful sounding nostrums. Now, alternatively, the United States might start increasingly exiting global order business altogether. Instead of trying to reassure weaker nations by supporting international rules and institutions, America may well deploy every tool in its coercive arsenal: tariffs, financial sanctions, visa restrictions, cyber espionage, drone strikes, to wring the best deal possible out of both allies and adversaries. The strong take what they want, the weak endure what they must. That's why all the people who I talked to in the dissident right sphere over the past few weeks, who just want to exit politics, say that's not such a good idea. You shouldn't be obsessed with politics, but you shouldn't completely exit it either, because then you're just ceding power to those who are likely to be hostile to you. So in the next few decades, there will be unlikely to be enduring partnerships based on common values. There will just be transactions. Trump's transactional approach will dominate America's foreign policy in the decades ahead. America will judge other countries not by their commitment to human rights or their commitment to the liberal democratic order or their willingness to solve global problems, but by their ability to create American jobs or to eliminate threats to America. And most countries, according to these criteria, will simply become irrelevant. So just as when women age, some women hit the wall at age 20, others hit the wall at 22, 24, 27. What happens, though, once they hit the wall is they simply become irrelevant to men's sexual interests, that they just become invisible. And most countries will essentially become invisible for the United States. American commerce will likely steadily shift to the Western Hemisphere and especially to North America. Already accounts for a third of U.S. trade and a third of global GDP. So other regions face setbacks from aging populations and rising automation. North America is the only region with all the ingredients necessary for sustained economic growth, a huge growing market of wealthy consumers, abundant raw materials, a mixture of high skill and low cost labor, advanced technology, peaceful international relations. U.S. may maintain strategic alliances, but purely on paper, most will be irrelevant. Washington might retain only two sets of regular partners. The first would include Australia, Canada, Japan, the United Kingdom, because these countries are strategically arrayed across the globe and their militaries and their intelligence agencies are already integrated with Washington's. All but Japan boast growing working age populations, unlike most other U.S. allies. Thus, they have potential tax bases to contribute to U.S. missions. And the second group of allies would be places such as the Baltic states, the Gulf Arab monarchies, and Taiwan, which share borders with or sit in close proximity to U.S. adversaries such as Russia and China. The U.S. may continue to arm these partners, but would no longer plan to defend them. Washington would essentially use the Baltic states and Taiwan and the Gulf Arab monarchies as buffers to check the Chinese, the Iranians, and the Russians and their expansionist dreams without direct U.S. intervention.
Ideology, which has become a kind of replacement for Christianity. It's a kind of state enforced. It's a state church. It's a state church in every Western democracy, in quotations, or liberal democracy. They've all developed the same state church, and in all these countries, the academy and the media have become the priesthood by which this religion is both imposed on the state and inflicted on the population. It seems to operate very much, in some ways like the church, the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. It sort of permeates everything in society. No state can survive, which is heretical, which violates the teachings of and of course we have crusades. I was recently struck by this neoconservative author who publishes in conservative magazines now in the United States, Jamie Kirchick, saying that we have to fight a crusade against Russia because Putin does not have gay pride praise. They don't teach gay ideologies in school, which means they're violating human rights. And I found this interesting since, up until a few years ago in the United States, we were just as guilty of violating that. But then, LGBT further transformed our culture, our society, and our state, impacted on our state. So that the multicultural ideology doesn't stay the same. It's based on victims, and the list of victims can keep increasing as long as all the victims are seen as victims of white Christian males or Western civilization as a white Christian civilization or something like that. So
I love Rob Henderson's Twitter feed. He's a PhD candidate. He tweets from a new study. Browsing social media profiles of others decreases self-esteem. Upward comparisons in terms of high social status signaled by a large number of likes and comments on posts is associated with a decrease in self-esteem. Back to Foreign Affairs magazine. So outside of these partnerships, all of Washington's alliances and relationships, including NATO and its connections with longtime allies such as South Korea, will be negotiable. The United States would no longer woo countries to participate in multilateral alliances. Other countries would have to bargain on a bilateral basis for U.S. protection and market access. Countries with little to offer would have to find new partners or just fend for themselves. What will happen to the world if the United States fully embraces this America First vision? So some analysts, including the wonderful analyst like Robert Kagan, who promoted the invasion of Iraq in 2003, they foresee a return to despotism, protectionism, and the strife of the 1930s, with China and Russia reprising the roles of Imperial Japan and Nazi Germany. Others predict a violent scramble for security and resources in which Russia invades its neighbors and East Asia descends into naval warfare. So, post-war order, although flawed and incomplete in many ways, fostered the most peaceful and prosperous period in human history. Its absence will make the world a more dangerous place. Thanks to the United States essentially being the world's global policeman, for decades, most countries have not had to fight for market access. They have not had to guard their supply chains. They have not had to seriously defend their borders. The American Navy has kept international waterways open. The U.S. market has provided reliable consumer demand and capital for dozens of countries. American security guarantees cover about 70 states. The security guarantees had the effect of neutering Germany and Japan, the main regional rivals of Russia and China. Moscow and Beijing then focused on forging ties with the rest of the world rather than fighting their historic enemies. Without U.S. patronage and protection, countries will have to get back in the business of securing themselves and their economic lifelines. So we'll see a return of great power mercantilism, new forms of imperialism. Powerful countries will reduce their economic insecurity by establishing exclusive economic zones where their firms will enjoy cheap and secure access to raw materials and large captive consumer markets. China already trying to do this with its Belt and Road Initiative, network of infrastructure projects around the world. It has a Made in China 2025 policy to stimulate domestic production and consumption, and it's trying to create a closed-off parallel internet. If the United States follows suit, other countries will have to attach themselves to an American or a Chinese bloc or forge blocks of their own. France might try to restore its grip on its former African colonies. Russia might try to corral former Soviet states into a regional union. Germany will increasingly look beyond Europe's shrinking population to find buyers for its exports, and will have to develop the military capacity to secure these new far-flung markets and supply lines.
The list of victims will go on and on. And the thing that I emphasize, one of the points I emphasize in my book on multiculturalism, is the obvious resemblance between how multicultural ideology functions and a certain kind of Calvinist theology. That you have the elect. The elect are the homosexuals, the lesbians, the blacks, and so forth. Feminist. They're all seen as the elect, and those people who side with them, you know, even if they are unfortunate enough to be, let's say, white males, but you know, if they express regrets, remorse about their position and their inherent guilt, right? I mean, you're born with guilt. If you're white, you practice systemic racism, to use the term of our illustrious President Biden and his vice president, who right now seem to be enjoying unusual popularity. They're like 51 or 52%, even according to Rasmussen. Most of the things they say strikes me as utter gibberish, but you know, people do resonate to stuff about having open borders and letting in others and how all blacks are victims and so forth, because they have been so thoroughly immersed in this religion for so long. From the time they enter school, you turn on your TV, you get indoctrinated in this. This does look, as I said, like the medieval church, but it's much more pervasive. And given modern communications and means of indoctrinating people, you can do much better than the medieval church did. I mean, you just, you know, you can get total conformity. And of course, the United States is less developed in this respect than a place like Germany, which is where we may be, or Canada, where we may be in, you know, 5 to 10 years. So it is not a peculiarly American ideology. And I've now revised the view that, you know, it is somehow exclusively linked to Calvinism or Calvinist theology.
Okay, so in the years ahead, as great powers compete for economic spheres, global governance will erode, geopolitical conflict will paralyze the United Nations, as was the case during the Cold War. NATO will soon dissolve as the United States starts cherry-picking its partners. The unraveling of the U.S. security blanket over Europe will mean the end of the European Union. The few arms control treaties that remain in force today will probably fall by the wayside as countries will militarize to defend themselves. Efforts to combat transnational problems such as climate change, financial crises, or pandemics will mimic the world's shambolic response to COVID-19. When countries hoarded supplies, the World Health Organization parroted Chinese misinformation, and the United States withdrew into itself. Resulting disorder will jeopardize the very survival of many states. Since 1945, the number of countries in the world has tripled from 46 to nearly 200. Most of these new states, however, are weak and lack energy. They lack resources, they lack food, domestic markets, advanced technology, military power, or defensible borders. So 2/3 of all countries today cannot provide basic services to their people without international help. Most countries depend on the post-war order. Without such support, these countries will steadily collapse or be conquered. Fragile aid-dependent states such as Afghanistan, Haiti, Liberia are just some of the more obvious high-risk cases. Less obvious ones are capable but trade-dependent countries such as Saudi Arabia, Singapore, South Korea. Their economic systems will struggle to function in a world of closed markets and militarized sea lanes.
It's almost kind of inverted. I mean, I cannot blame this on John Calvin or Jonathan Edwards, obviously, or certainly not Oliver Cromwell. But you can see, originally I saw these sort of Calvinist, a kind of shadow Calvinism or Calvinist ideas about, fallenness and redemption and so forth. But it seems to now have gone throughout the Christian world, and you find this in Catholic countries.
Okay, I want to go in a slightly different direction for a break here.
The ABC has been accused of encouraging national disunity and promoting its own political agenda after publishing a story on its website using the terms Invasion Day and Australia Day interchangeably.
Hello, I'm Paul Barry. Welcome to Media Watch. And it's only a month into the new year, but the ABC is already under fire. This time for dividing the nation over this headline and tweet about Australia's National Day.
What to do on Australia Day, Invasion Day, in 2021.
One of Australia's most contentious dates is here again.
The article was innocent enough, a handy guide to Australia Day events and planned protests in the major capitals. But calling it Invasion Day and claiming it was so divisive inevitably sparked a backlash on Twitter.
Shocked and disgusted in this headline.
I'm not against a date change, but this is not the role of the national broadcaster.
It's Australia Day, not Invasion Day.
As the attacks rolled in, the ABC initially stuck with the headline and attempted to justify using the name. As Sunrise explained,
Advice given to ABC program teams was that the two dictionaries list Survival Day and Invasion Day as roughly synonymous with Australia Day. And given the variety of terms in use and the different perspectives on the day that the ABC is going to cover over the course of the long weekend, it would be inappropriate to mandate staff use any one term over others in all contexts.
that arcane defence posted on the ABC website in response to the critics prompted the Australian to serve up this damning front-page headline.
ABC deems Australia Day inappropriate for staff.
Which, of course, was not quite true, as ABC News Breakfast host Michael Rowland tried to make clear to viewers.
The default definition, Lisa, for Australia Day is Australia Day. We are simply acknowledging that Indigenous groups and other people do refer alternatively to that day as either Invasion Day or Survival Day, just reflecting on opinion out there. So it should be no big thing, and we should point out, I should point out at least that reading those News Corp headlines, you get a slightly warped view on what we're on about, which is, I guess, no great surprise.
But that defence wasn't quite true either, because the ABC's headline had officially adopted the term. And by then the ABC had lost control of the story anyway and was being given a good Murdocking by the telly with this front page.
Auntie's Oz Day rift.
Which came with a double-page spread inside, a scathing editorial, and this Warren Brown cartoon.
I've heard the locals could be difficult.
And soon the politicians were also piling in, with Communications Minister Paul Fletcher, who initially declined to comment, calling on the ABC invaders to retreat.
The ABC clearly got it wrong. This was an inaccurate statement, this online item by the ABC, and I've called on them to correct it.
And a few hours later, the ABC did just that, allowing Sky News and others to kick Auntie again with this breaking news.
The ABC has backed down following backlash over a headline referring to Australia Day as being interchangeable with Invasion Day. This article listed events occurring in capital cities tomorrow, with the two titles given equal place to describe the public holiday. But after bipartisan backlash, the ABC has now changed the headline to remove Invasion Day from its lead and declared its policy is to use the term Australia Day.
All in all, a textbook bungle from beginning to end. Wrong for ABC News to use the headline in the first place, silly not to fix it with the minimum of fuss, and embarrassing when the climb down eventually came because it appeared the ABC was buckling to political pressure. To sum it up, a lesson in how not to handle a crisis.
Okay, so it's not a good sign when your national broadcaster calls your day of independence, your day of national celebration, Invasion Day. But of course, from the perspective of the indigenous people who were invaded, it makes perfect sense. And for the coalition of the fringe to virtue signal how righteous they are and how bad they feel for being alive and having a nation, it's a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate how righteous you are. So the coalition of the fringe in Australia or in America resonates with this type of thing, and it comes down to whom do we give our attention, right? To whom do we support? To whom do we listen? To whom do we gather with? For whom do we vote? Because there's a cultural war going on in Australia and in America and many nations, and we get a vote, not just a political vote, but we choose our elites on the basis of who do we give attention to. Whose TV shows do we watch? Whose movies do we watch? Whose books do we read? Whose blogs do we read? Whose live streams do we watch? What communities do we join? Right? We get to choose our elites. We get to choose our vote, what we support, whether we want to support the coalition of the fringe or if we want to identify with the core of our nation. So don't completely withdraw from America or Australia. Make good choices. We're in a new age. You can call this the attention economy. All right. So to whom do you give your attention? That's incredibly important. And advertising is part of the attention economy. Journalism, politics, live streaming, social media, all part of the attention economy. Reading here, Charlie Warzel, writing a column in the New York Times. I talked to the Cassandra of the internet age. The internet rewired our brains. He predicted it would. So Michael Goldhaber. And he saw the following things coming: the complete dominance of the internet, increased shamelessness in politics, terrorists co-opting social media, the rise of reality TV, personal websites, oversharing, personal essays, fandoms, the online influencer culture, and the near destruction of our ability to focus. Well, we haven't arrived at that. My ability to focus has not been impaired by the internet. My ability to read, long, thick books has not been impaired by the internet. So people need to make wise choices. For example, I leave my phone on Do Not Disturb. So if you're jumping every time your phone beeps or rings, it's not easy to maintain your focus on what's important. So often the urgent crowds out the important. So Goldhaber is a former theoretical physicist. In the mid-1980s, he had a revelation. He was becoming obsessed with the information glut, that there was simply more access to news, opinion, and entertainment than one could handle. And so he realized one of the most finite and precious resources in the world is human attention. So every single action we take, from calling our grandparents, cleaning our kitchen, scrolling through our phones, it's a transaction. We are taking what precious little attention we have and diverting it toward something. It's a zero-sum proposition. When you pay attention to one thing, you ignore something else. So attention is highly desirable, and those who want it tend to want as much as they can possibly get. This causes deepening inequality. When you have attention, you have power. Some people will try to get huge amounts of attention, and they won't necessarily use it in positive ways. So Goldhaber popularized the term attention economy in 1997 with an essay in Wired magazine. Predicted the internet would upend the advertising industry, create a star system where whoever you are, however you express yourself, you can now have a crack at the global audience. So that's what I'm doing. I'm having a crack at a global audience. I'm giving a global audience the high, short, fast one, the high and hard one. But there's a price to be paid for living in an attention economy. It can lead to people developing all sorts of dangerous addictions. You can have relentless pressure to get, some fraction of this limited resource of attention, and this can generate ever greater demands on each of us to pay what scant attention we can to others. This can destabilize societies and individuals. It means that the most shameless among us might get disproportionate benefit from the attention economy. Our abilities to pay attention are limited, but our abilities to receive it are infinite. So the value of true modesty or humility is hard to sustain in an attention economy. So I think he's misunderstanding humility and modesty. Humility and modesty means accepting life on life's terms, accepting reality, understanding your proper importance and your proper role in your various interactions. So I live stream 15, 20 hours a week. I can't recall the last time I felt humiliated by the process. But if I was coming on here saying stupid things or misjudging my role, then I would get constantly humiliated. That's how you know whether or not you're living in reality, is are you getting humiliated? If you're constantly getting humiliated, you are out of touch with reality. Now, the attention economy can be grueling if you don't make good choices. So I don't find the attention economy grueling. I limit other people's access to me. I don't allow people to call me up and interfere with what I'm working on. But for some people in an attention economy, one is never not on, at least when one is awake, since one is nearly always paying, getting, or seeking attention. I don't think that's true. But for everyone, I'm sure it's true for some people. Attention has always been currency, but we've begun to live our lives increasingly online, and perhaps attention is now the currency. Perhaps any discussion of power is ultimately a question about attention. How do we extract attention? How do we wield our power? How do we waste it, abuse it, sell it, lose it, and profit from it? So there are many desperate and disparate people out there, desperate for attention. We've got a glut of selfies and videos from QAnon supporters, militia members, COVID-19 deniers. We've got people desperately seeking their own audience and fracturing reality in the process. Nuanced policy discussions, he complains, have been simplified into meaningless slogans to travel farther online. Politicians stake out more extreme positions to commandeer news cycles. He worries that with Brexit, rational discussion of what people stand to gain or lose from policies will be drowned out by the loudest and most ridiculous. He says many of the most polarizing factors in the country are attentional. Not having a college degree means less attention from corporations or the economy at large. Living in a rural area means being farther away from cultural centers, may result in feeling alienated by the attention that cities generate in news and popular culture. Trump tapped into this frustration by pretending to pay attention. He acknowledged his supporters who feel they deserve attention and aren't getting any. He worries we fail to acknowledge that we live in a roaring attention economy. Attention is a limited resource, so pay attention to where you pay attention. It's not a question of sitting by yourself and doing nothing, but asking, How do you allocate the attention you have in more focused, intentional ways? Who do we amplify? Who do we pay attention to? And think socially. What are the implications? We struggle to attune ourselves to groups of people who feel they're not getting the attention they deserve. Attention is like the air we breathe. It's vital, but largely invisible. And we may well feel, if we spend a lot of time on Twitter, as if our attention has become polluted. Maybe the quality of our ability to pay attention has been diminished. Maybe we become so reliant on constant stimuli from our connected online world that you find yourself frequently out of touch with real people around you. You can't escape the attention economy, but we can explore ways our attention is generated, manipulated, valued, and degraded. So maybe we should pay attention to where we pay attention.
As well. But as I argue, and I haven't really changed my mind, that this does seem to only work in a Christian society, or what had been a Christian society.
Or a Protestant society, a Protestant society more than a Christian society, perhaps, because you're saying that it's got the Calvinist. If you turn, I'll get
you're right. I would argue that the Calvinist matrix, theological matrix, seems to work best, but it seems to have spread, into other forms of Christianity. I mean, Catholics sound exactly the same way now, as these American Calvinists did. I think there's enough of a shared theology so that it works this way. I should point out that I've revised some of my views since I wrote the book on multiculturalism. What I'm increasingly struck by these days is the role of corporate capitalism in all of this. The role of corporate capitalism and the power of the media. I think the media is more important than the state and the managerial state. They totally shape how people see the world here and throughout the West. And although I speak of them as the priesthood of the managerial class, I think there's something more than that. So I may have underestimated their influence when I wrote that book almost 20 years ago. And the other thing I may have underestimated is the role of hatred, sort of friend-enemy distinctions. People who hate, normal white society, are in the forefront of all of this. So it's not just the appropriation or misappropriation of Christian theology that we see, but
just a minute, Paul. So just a minute. So I want to make sure that the little darlings in the chat are complaining about an echo. So there's no current echo, so we're all right on that. Anyway, before I move on, I just say if you have questions for Paul particularly, obviously I've got a lot of questions for me which you kindly sent in on Monday.
Distortion of Christianity, which also builds on certain selected Christian elements, and it is a heresy in the Greek sense of chairein or chairesis, which is you pick and you choose what you want. That's what a heresy is, and they've removed certain elements or extrapolated certain elements from Christianity, and this becomes the key. And another thing that runs through all of this is egalitarianism, radical egalitarianism. And in that sense, I don't think it's like fascism. I think it's the opposite. It is a form of the left. The left believes in equality, and it's against particularity. It believes in universalism, and it believes in revolution. The influence of fascism that I do see, and I don't think it's fascism. I think it's Nazism. Like the Nazis, these people love violence. They're full of hate, and they have a very large support system, the way the Nazis did, when they were coming to power. And they're absolutely shameless in the way they're behaving now. In the United States and other countries, they're closing down opposition. They're going after whatever remains of opposition they can mop up as internal terrorists. Hitler did exactly the same thing. Somebody compared the present left to Mussolini, and I don't think that's fair. Mussolini was not as ruthless. He was much more conservative, in fact, and was willing to operate within the existing, constitutional framework for a number of years. These people are just in a hurry to seize power, and they will use violence and total suppression as a way of doing this.
I think that's a very interesting point that you made about it being a Christian heresy, actually, because in the early church, you have this evolution. It's not people think, oh, it's Catholic Church. It's not. There were all these different competing kinds of Christianity, and there was a particular Christianity which won through, which you could argue was the one that was adaptive for the group. The groups that had this form of religion that meant that it wasn't adaptive were killed or were marginalized, like the Cathars or the Barbella Gnostics or whatever, the Scythians. And some of these heresies were, like, in that sense, were quite not dissimilar to multiculturalism. There wasn't really a belief in God, or if there was a God, he was like an evil God. So I think the idea of it is a heresy. And so the implication for that from an evolutionary point of view might be that the evolutionary pressures have weakened. And so these heresies that were shut out because they were maladaptive, because stupid ideas can take off. I think that's a quite interesting point. But what about the idea of romantic nationalism and sort of national socialism? How would you see that? Would you see those as Christian heresies as well, or would you agree with any argument?
I really don't. I think the problem you have with something like national, it looks so different from Christianity. I've always wondered, they said, well, Christians collaborated or something, where some of them were anti-Semitic and so forth, but Christianity looks much more like multiculturalism than it does like National Socialism in some ways. It's universal. It teaches the equal spiritual dignity of all people, which the Nazis certainly didn't teach. I do think you're right about the Gnostics and the Cathars. They do seem to resemble these people very much. The Cathars and the Gnostics looked upon normal human relations as somehow distorted and evil. They were against marriage. They were against traditional families. And they also believed that there would be a kind of apocalyptic transformation of the world that we would see coming soon, in which we would all be liberated from our evil natures and everything would be changed. So I think the Gnostic, when I say the Gnostic subterranean influence may have come out, because I do see similarities there. The one, and of course the Cathars and the Gnostics also distinguish between those who are truly illuminated. Well, certainly the Gnostics do. This is not quite as explicitly stated in Albigensianism, but the illuminated people are the ones who sort of lead the way, right? They're the ones who have the gnosis, sort of the secret. And we have the same thing now, but I don't think you can remove also the element of radical egalitarianism, that they want to destroy all traditional hierarchy. Any hierarchy in which the family or society is based, at least in the Western world, because everywhere else you can oppress women, do anything you want. It's great. It's only the Western world which is seen as fallen into sin. So that I think there's an explicitly anti-Western animus, which I think runs through multiculturalism. It does not apply to other societies.
But with Christianity, you idolize the poor person. With Marxism, you idolize the worker.
Right.
With romantic nationalism, you idolize the peasant. So in that sense, you idolize the poor person and you romanticize the poor person. It has that in common.
Yeah, I suppose. Of course, there are other aspects of romantic nationalism that go in a very different direction, toward elitism, and the superiority of your nation in relation to other nations. I think what you find here is an absolute loathing for Western civilization, insofar as it is white and Christian and cannot be and male. So it's almost a rebellion against reality itself. And all these judgments are suspended when it comes to other groups who are allowed to practice racism, homophobia. One of the things that I found interesting working on this book on anti-fascism is that our anti-fascists glorify communist leaders in communist societies, which killed homosexuals, which hated blacks, and this, but they're somehow exempted from judgment because they're communist. Therefore, they have to be good people. You find this in Mark Bray. You find this in any number of other anti-fascists. You find this in Obama. Who glorified Fidel Castro, put homosexuals in concentration camps. So, any judgment that you make of Western white Christian society will be suspended when it comes to any of their enemies presumably on the left.
So I do like that point. I might put that in my new book. So have I got an echo? I've got an echo. Have you got me on there? Have you got the YouTube thing on?